Good evening. I'd like to call to order the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education. It's Tuesday, September 6th, 2022, and we're meeting in a blended format with some of us in person at Casco Bay High School and others joining via Zoom. My name is Adam Burke, they, them, and I will be acting as chair this evening. Thank you in advance for your grace as I work through the meeting with some mechanics not familiar to me yet. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Ms. Biliou.
Here.
Ms. Bondo. Ms. Bryden.
Here.
Mr. Burke.
Here.
Mr. Grant.
Here.
Ms. Lentz.
Here.
Ms. Russell Better.
Here.
Mr. Youssef. Here. Ms. Aslami. Mr. Alzamili.
Here.
Ms. Diu.
Here.
Ms. Ellis.
Here.
Ms. McLaughlin. And Ms. Santiago.
Here.
And Chair Figdor.
Here. And if I might just quickly thank Board Member Burke for chairing today. I've been under the weather and coughing a lot. And so appreciate him stepping up. I'm not contagious any longer and chairing the meeting tonight. And I also want to mention that Ms. Bondo is traveling internationally and not able to join us tonight. And thank you so much again, Board Member Burke.
You're welcome. All right, I invite you to stand and join us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, the Wolastoqiyik or Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki Confederacy or People of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki people visible in our schools and classrooms. This evening, we're starting our business meeting with public comment on any issue we are not voting on tonight. After that, we will have a specific public hearing on the resolution related to balancing our high school enrollment. So if you're here to speak on that issue, I just ask you to wait until we have that portion of the meeting. So before we begin public content on items not on tonight's agenda, we'll read some rules. So meetings of the board are public in the sense that they are held in public. This does not mean they are public meetings in the same sense as a town meeting. However, comments and concerns related to the matters under consideration by the board are welcome within the guidelines listed below. The chair will provide an opportunity for public comment during the consideration of a major agenda item. And in order to conduct our meetings efficiently, please be aware of these rules. Any person wishing to address the school board shall be recognized by the board chair and come forward to the microphone and state their name and address before speaking. Speakers must address their comments and questions to the chair. Each person may speak once for up to 3 minutes for each agenda item. Persons wishing to speak for more than 3 minutes on any item shall request that the board vote on an extension of time. Speakers may indicate support for a previous speaker's comments, but are asked not to be repetitious of comments already made to the board in the interest of most efficient use of time. No complaints or allegations will be allowed in public concerning any staff member or any person connected with the school district. Persons present at board meetings are requested not to applaud or otherwise express approval or disapproval of any statements made or actions taken by the board. And the primary purpose of the meeting is for the board to conduct its business as charged by law. Spontaneous discussion as well as disorder and disruption prevent the board from doing its work and is not permitted. And with that said, I'll try to alternate between in person and on Zoom. And if there's anybody that would like to speak to the board on an item, on anything that's not on the agenda, please come up to the mic or raise your hand on Zoom. Hello.
Hi, Julianne Opperman, 25 Woodmont Street. I'm speaking not to anything that you're voting on, but to the two items that were in the education part, student achievement and then attendance, because I think those are the two critical aspects of what the board should be dealing with. First of all, the English language learner staff must be commended. The percentage of bridging students who are well above basic levels in reading and math has increased over the years, and that was very impressive. It would be good to dig into why this happens, where they're learning, what's working so well, and is it related to the student's age, their primary language, their school leveling, their mainstream courses taken, the regular ed class size, or which Portland school they're attending. I don't know that you can find the correlation with attendance, but it seems that student achievement and attendance go hand in hand, as some of us know well. There was one piece of data that you'll see that comes up where it shows multiple schools, multiple districts, and the expectations, and there's a huge jump in the numbers. I think you saw that in the presentation that you was given. And the question I would bring is what changed in the assessment? Jumps like that don't happen because kids are and teachers are all of a sudden incredibly fabulous and can do 100% better than they've done before. They do better, but that's a little anomaly. I question what, without overburdening the teachers, how is the school system going to intensify the remediation of the needs of all students in the areas of language, arts, and mathematics? It's been going down in multiple levels, and that's a concern. We have to not only make up for what's going on with the COVID, but it didn't seem to be going up prior to that from what I saw. I wanted to know how we're going to do without backsliding in the areas of STEM and social studies, fine arts, and practical arts. So often, because there's no child left behind, they just cut to the chase and do reading and math to get good scores. That's my first presentation, first 3 minutes. My second one is on the other topic.
Are you requesting an additional 3 minutes?
Yeah, this is for the second topic. It's two different topics I'm speaking on. So the second one is the attendance data and all. And the attendance data shows an age-related trend that is not surprising. Among the reasons for absenteeism is
Ms.
disengagement.
Opperman, your first 3 minutes are up. I look to the board if they'd like to grant permission for an additional 3 minutes. And I see nod of hands. Yes, please continue.
I thought you said that if you had two different topics, you had 3 minutes each. That's
No, it's per opportunity
okay,
for
Adam.
public comment. Sorry for the
okay, Adam.
confusion.
All right. So the attendance situation, among the reasons for absenteeism is disengagement from the school. Is there a policy that creates mentorship for the students? Is there a member of the staff that contacts the student each day, whether they're absent or not, to create that connection to school? What policy can be put forward to increase the likelihood that every student will have an adult they connect with in the building? Data shows that that is a critically important factor for many. Also, is there a cohort of students who begin to be absent in earlier grades and increase their absence as they move through the system? I don't know that you could determine that legally, but it'd be good, interesting if you could try. And where are these students when they're not in school? Are they caring for family, working? After the discussion about suspensions, is absenteeism related to in-school suspension? That would be my question there. And is there a need to extend or adjust the school day to meet the needs of these students who do not seem to be attending? And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Opperman. Somebody else like to come up for a comment? Yeah, please.
Thank you. My name is Carrie Dowdy, Portland Education Association, and I also live at 27 Fleetwood Street in Portland. I'm here speaking tonight for two reasons. One is to state the PEA's solidarity with our EdTech colleagues as they start another year without a contract. You may have noticed the red for ed being worn around the district today. And two, the PEA is an umbrella association covering many different impact areas within our schools. Under the PEA umbrella, our ed techs have their own president, Jen Cooper, and VP, Shana Blotner. And I'd like to introduce you all to Jen Cooper and pass the mic on to her.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jen Cooper. I am also a resident here in Portland and a parent of a high school sophomore. I'm coming into the role as president for the EdTech Union. And as Carrie said, today, if you were out and about at our schools, you saw a lot of us in our red, and we joined together to create visibility for us entering our second year without a contract. So I look forward to working with you all, and it was a pleasure to greet you. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dowdy, Ms. Cooper. Anybody else that would like to speak, please?
Hi, my name is Allison Crocker. I'm a resident of District 5. I'm the mother of a sophomore at Portland High School and a member of No Left Turn in Education. Here tonight to express my concern with the repeated use of surveys as the sole premise for policy change impacting the safety of all students. The increase in youth violence, it's imperative we reevaluate the push towards restorative justice and its impact on the whole student body. It was over 2 years ago when student surveys were utilized to justify the removal of SROs from our high schools. More recently, student surveys were again provided as the factual basis for rationalizing the middle school protests and chaos that ensued. As a result, many parents now fear for the safety of their students. The lack of hallway supervision provides opportunity for frequent physical altercation, as it is well known there is no adult nearby. Last year, after a violent fight that went unnoticed, a student was allowed to leave the building only to be buzzed back in with two large, sharp drainage stones in hand. In another incident, multiple students from area schools were erroneously buzzed into the building and allowed to roam before being expelled from the premises. While that event was meant as an innocent prank, it evidenced a failure to adequately monitor building entry and is indicative of insufficient safety protocols surrounding school access. Bathrooms are also unmonitored, permitting incessant drug use and sales. With deadly fentanyl flooding the streets, it is your responsibility to eliminate the opportunity for drug consumption on school property. Failure to do so will inevitably lead to tragic results and only begs the question, why wasn't the school more proactive in preventing this tragedy? In my professional capacity, I'm part of a team tasked with policy implementation. While surveys are a tool used to obtain opinion on policy impact, new policy cannot be based on non-factual data alone. The use of surveys to support changes to disciplinary policy have resulted in an unsafe learning environment. While eliminating the disparity in discipline is an admirable goal, you cannot sacrifice the safety of our children to achieve it. I look forward to hearing of the enhanced safety changes that you will be implementing based on this verifiable information. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Crocker.
Hi, thank you. My name's Leo Hilton. I live at 3 Salem Street in Portland. I am a proud union electrician and a member of the Maine Democratic Socialists of America Labor Solidarity Working Group. And I'm here tonight to speak and urge you to sit down and bargain in good faith with my brothers and sisters, my union siblings, who work as ed techs in the Portland Public Schools. I'm a graduate of Portland High School and went to schools here in Portland, Maine throughout my entire education. And without the essential work of ed techs, I wouldn't be here, the smart and kind and caring person that I am today. So I appreciate the hard work that you've all done to promote equity and push forward with a progressive vision for schools that I can be proud of as somebody who lives in Portland. But it's, I think, a shame and a betrayal of those values if you don't work to, stand with these people who are the core of the educational experience and workers who deserve a fair shake and fair bargaining. So please, let's work together for a contract for them. And I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Anya Rosenberg on Zoom. We can give them permission to speak. Rosenberg, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, good evening. My name is Anya Rosenberg. I teach 5th grade at Presumpscot School, and I also live in the Presumpscot district. First of all, I stand in solidarity with our ed techs and believe wholeheartedly that they should be going into this year with a fair contract. They are the glue that holds our schools together, and I see this every day at Presumpscot. I could talk to you about a lot of things. We're undergoing major construction. Our community has come together, rallied together to create a safe, viable building for our kids. We're super excited about welcoming them in tomorrow. And the teachers, ed tech, staff, and principals have really showed heroic efforts to get our building ready, custodial staff especially. But I did need to bring something up today that feels more personal because it came up today for me, which is the fact that as we go into September, this is the holiest month for Jewish people. I know that we are a religious ethnic minority here in Portland and definitely within the Portland Public Schools. But I was alerted today that we will not be able to take religious holidays off because the lawyer for Portland Public Schools advised that this could be some sort of discrimination against non-religious people. I found this to be deeply, deeply troubling. And I think within a district that values equity, we understand that treating people the same is not equity. Giving everyone the same number of personal days and making Jewish or Muslim or any other minoritized religious group take personal days off for our holy days is completely unacceptable. And I ask you to please reconsider this and allow us to take paid religious days off. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rosenberg. Is there anybody else that would like to speak on an item that's not on the agenda for a vote this evening? Okay, I don't see any hands on Zoom or no one else at the podium here, so we will move to a public hearing on the resolution to balance high school enrollment. As a reminder, if you're on Zoom, use the raise your hand feature provided by Zoom. It's either in the webinar control bar at the bottom of your screen or can be found by selecting your name on the participant screen. I'll call your Zoom name and then you can address the committee. And if you're here in person, of course, come up to the microphone. You're asked to state your name, address, you'll have 3 minutes to comment. Should you near the 3-minute mark, I'll see if additional time is needed and we may grant it by board consent. And at the 6-minute mark, that will be all. So anybody like to speak on the resolution to balance our high school enrollment, please come up to the mic or raise your hand on Zoom.
Good evening. I'm Whitney Letellier. I live at 63 Primrose Lane, Portland. Family, we have a 7th grader and an 8th grader as of today. Just wanted to address the board and say that I hope no changes will be made to the choice. It seems rushed, and with the superintendent leaving, it just seems like it came up quick in the summer, and I just hope that no changes will be made. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Kimberly Elder, 30 Chamberlain Ave. I am a Portland Public Schools employee, but I am here as a parent. I have 3 boys who are Portland Public School students with 1 in each level, elementary, middle, and high school. We're clearly all in. We are relatively recent newcomers in Portland after living and learning abroad. We were attracted by the myriad of program choices within a public district: Spanish immersion, expeditionary learning, an international baccalaureate school, and importantly, high school choice. The changes to the high school selection are why I'm here tonight. Historically, the most popular high school alternates frequently between Portland High School and Deering High School. I understand the planning and staffing difficulties when projections don't match enrollment realities. However, I am concerned that the timing of this vote during the first month of school, when educators and families have barely had a chance to pack their school bags, will be seen as veiled and not inclusive. With this year being Superintendent Botanna's last, and with new administrators in nearly every building, I encourage you to pause. Take the time to engage and to ask the community why, in this moment, is one school more favored than the other. Move forward from a position of strength and confidence. Collect data rather than making impactful decisions based on perceptions and assumptions. The Portland Promise guides us to examine our actions and to ensure that we act with integrity and with equity as our foundation. With this in mind, it is concerning that the proposed changes only impact 2 high schools when we have 3 comprehensive high schools in the district. Enrollment in Portland Public Schools has been on the decline. The pandemic exacerbated this, but it wasn't the impetus. By making high school selection changes without the needed time and community input, I am concerned that this trend will continue. Families will lose agency in their children's educational journey and choose to go elsewhere. In my short time here, I have been inspired by the community of Portland's dedication to education, the pride that comes from history and tradition, and the strength that comes from consequential change. Please take the needed time to engage your most meaningful stakeholders, our families. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Eli Small. I'm still processing what I just heard about the days off, about religious holidays. I live at 314 Ludlow Street in Portland. I taught at Deering High School for 13 years. I graduated from Deering High School in 1994. I've got siblings who went to Deering. My wife works at Portland High School. I've got siblings who went to Portland High School. I've got 2 sons who went to Portland High School. I bring all of this up because in my 13 years at Deering, one of the worst experiences I ever had was when an incoming freshman would say in some sort of conversation, well, I wanted to go to Casco Bay, but I didn't get in. And I always felt horrible that we were going to start a student's high school career by giving them oh, it'll be okay. Settle for what you've got. And now I'm hearing that we're going to go even further after all of these years of high school choice is amazing. High school choice is amazing. And is it even mathematically possible now that we could have a student have to do their 3rd choice of high school, depending on how things shake out? But even worse than being at Deering as an educator and having to hear the disappointment in students as they started at a school which wasn't their first choice and always got under my skin. The 2 years that I taught at King Middle School and witnessed students in tears because their lottery number didn't come up and they weren't going to go to their first choice of high school. After the years of us talking about how great school choice is, I think that it would be a shame for us to do that to a single other student, and yet we continue to do it. I guess I would ask, if you're going to go forward with this policy, it gets written into the policy that the school board can go to individual homes and let them know where they're going to be going to school so that the teachers don't have to be the ones in the classrooms to do it.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allison Villani. I live at 20 Salem Street, and I am also a teacher in the Portland Public Schools and a parent of 2 children who went through the Portland Public Schools. Love the Portland Public Schools. I would second everybody who has spoken and spoken more eloquently than I am going to, but I question the process. So I think that it definitely needs a lot more discussion. I'm wondering how many students were interviewed, hopefully from every demographic that you are talking about or want to care about, to find out why they went to the high schools that they did, because high school choice is great. And there are many, many different reasons. So I would second the putting your perception on numbers and actually talk to the students, many, many students, and find out why they chose to go where they go. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further comments on this issue? See Jill on Zoom. If we could allow them to speak, please. Jill, you may need to click on mute. Okay, Jill, we'll come back in just a moment. We're going to come here to the podium.
My apologies. I hit that by accident. Sorry.
We'll pick up with you, Jill, while you're off mute. Is that okay? Yeah, okay, thank you. Jill, please proceed.
My apologies. I actually did not mean to post that. Sorry about that.
Okay. Sorry for the up and down. Back at the podium.
Good evening. My name is Stacy Hung. I live at 143 Summit Street. I have 2 kids that go to Portland High School. I am a Portland High School grad myself and go through generations through the Portland public school systems. I also work in a school, not in this particular district, but I've spent my whole adult life working with children and adolescents. I am here tonight. My kids won't be affected by this decision that you're making. I'm already grandfathered in. It doesn't really impact my family, but I'm concerned for future families of the decision that you're trying to make. It is one that feels like another knee-jerk reaction. It feels like it is done in a homogeneous think tank, and I implore you to do what others have said and interview other people and the students and find out what they're doing, because it doesn't seem like the kids have been asked why they go to the particular schools that they do. And if I'm reading your proposal correctly, it seems as though that your concept of how we're going to divvy up the schools to make them more equitable is based on race, socioeconomic status, and special education needs. And if that's the case, I can't imagine being an adolescent teenager, especially like in any time of the world, but especially now, we're just coming off of COVID. Anxiety is huge through teenagers. I work with them in a high school. And to think that 90% are going to get what they want and 10% won't be able to. And it's basically going to be, sorry, you're too white, or you're too black, or you're too rich, or you're too poor, or you're too smart, or you're too challenged with your education. That's the reason why you're not going to get the school that you want. That is just causing so much harm to those students who don't make it into the school that they want. That's setting them up for failure. It's setting them up, like we've said before, for not appreciating the education that they're going to achieve in the school that they were selected to go to. It is harmful to our kids, on top of everything else that's being said about the process. I just really implore you to think about this longer and consider the process of how this is going to work, if this is the direction that you're actually going to go in. And I also implore you to actually think about what people are saying here tonight. The school board in general tends to have, again, a homogeneous think tank, and a lot of the people that I work with and the community don't feel heard. And so a lot of people told me tonight they're not even going to bother coming because they don't feel like it matters. And that shouldn't be the case with a school board. It should matter what your public people say. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Giovanna Bouchard. I live at 65 Racine Ave in Portland. I have a 5th grader at Lyseth and an 8th grader at Moore. While I recognize and respect the difficulty of staffing issues that this high school choice causes for administrators, I believe we need to think more about our kids. They've been through so much over these last few years, and now we're going to potentially tell them, sorry, you have yet one more thing you need to be disappointed about. We owe it to our kids to take the proper time to make this critical decision. The kids now in 8th grade never had a 5th grade graduation rise up ceremony. They didn't have their last field day. They've never had a middle school dance. They have so much that they've lost because of the pandemic, and they're looking for some normalcy here. They're looking and they're excited to choose a school where they'll feel comfortable, where they'll have their friends, where they'll have a program, where they'll feel comfortable with the teachers and administrators. We owe it to those kids to not rush this decision, to think about why one school is being chosen more than another school, and maybe think about what we can do as a district to make the schools valuable and equal to all of the kids in the district, to make it the best possible for all of our kids. If kids like Casco Bay more and they're being denied, then maybe we think about, should there be an expeditionary learning program, a track at Deering to attract more kids, so that we should increase our educational opportunities instead of making decisions because we have to. Decisions like this should have more thought. This feels a little bit rushed, in my opinion. I just feel strongly about this because I feel like I have an 8th grader, and I feel like if my kid is left out, it's going to devastate him. If he's not with his friends, that's going to be devastating. And these kids have lost so much. So I really think you need to not push this through. I understand there are issues, but this isn't the time to just now all of a sudden say, sorry, you can't have a choice. The school year just started today. These kids are going to be making decisions in a few months. It's too soon, too much, too fast, too soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Anne-Marie Gribben-Bouchard. I live at 54 9th Street in Portland. Grew up here in Portland, graduated from Portland High School. I have one kid that goes to Lincoln, one at Portland, and one that recently graduated. My dad was a longtime Portland High School teacher and historian at Portland High School. I'm just, after 43 years, you want to change the school choice. And I understand the fluctuations, but this has happened for years, and the district has found ways to make it work. I'm just, reading in the paper that, okay, if you're homeless or you have an IEP or you qualify for free and reduced lunch or you're an English language learner, you don't get put in the lottery. The Portland Press Herald went on to say that the district chose only to put students without diversity factors in the lottery. The board talks a lot about equity, and if you look up the definition of equity, it's being fair and impartial. There's no equity for my child in this process. I'm not exactly sure why diverse students get their first choice while my student may not. I, along with my child, should be able to decide how, what, and where to educate my child based on their individual needs. PHS and DHS have different schedules, and one school may be a better fit. Not to mention, if my child doesn't get his first choice, how will he feel if he's at a school without his core group of friends? I believe that we should just leave things well enough alone and let parents and kids choose which school is best for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jessica Kane. I live at 23 Raymond Road. I have a child in 6th grade and one in 10th grade at Portland High. I'm also a Portland High graduate, way back in the 90s when it was a more diverse school, where it was viewed as being less safe than Deering. And to be honest, a lot of the things that have been said about Deering in the last couple of years were said about Portland then. Thing is, it was a great school, had a perception problem. Deering is also a great school with a perception problem. And I think we're really fortunate here in Portland to have multiple options for kids to select from that are really valuable educational experiences. The problem is, if we make this change, some kids are not going to get the same choices that others have. And that's a really hard pill to swallow for kids who, to an earlier point, have lost a lot in the last few years, who are really putting time and effort into their decision making about where they go to school, where they'll be most successful, where they feel best about starting high school and getting their education. I'm actually a researcher by trade, and I constantly tell my colleagues, don't pre-solution without fully defining and understanding the problem. And I feel like we've skipped to a solution which is overly complex without fully understanding what's going into the decision making, what are the perceptions students are holding, and where we can make an impact. So I would just urge you to please take a step back, do a little more research, not hastily make this decision and push things through. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to speak on this issue? If you're on Zoom, raise your hand. If you're in person, come to the mic. Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Amber Shirts, Christie Road. I second most of what has been said already, and just want to add, I think there is likely a problem here somewhere, but it's not clear what solutions or what other options have been exhausted. So if we're going to singularly fast track a certain solution, please provide context on what drove this to be the most critical need right now and what other areas have been looked at to solve the actual root cause. Thank you.
Thank you. See any other hands on Zoom? I don't see anybody rising to the podium. Last chance to speak on this item. Okay, I will close public comment. And the public hearing on the resolution to balance high school enrollment. Thank you all for commenting. With that, we're going to move to the report of the chair. Which you've heard, I'm subbing in here, so bear with me. On behalf of Chair Figdor and myself, welcome to the 2022-23 school year. I hope there was ease and joy in your summer, and that continues as we begin the school year. Saying that, I know it wasn't the case at Longfellow and Presumpscot last week, and for that, I'm sorry. Thank you to our teachers, administrators, and families for your perseverance through surprise and uncertainty. I hope tomorrow is a wonderful day. Speaking of uncertainty, noticeably, we are in an entirely different phase of the pandemic, and with caution, I hope this means kids can be in school more and with fewer disruptions. I want to acknowledge Labor Day and our unions for the work they've done historically and today to ensure that all our workers have more rights. It's been a privilege to be on the negotiation team for 2 contracts during my service on the school board. On these first days of school, I hope there's curiosity, wonder, and passion in each of us, and that these are nurtured for our students and everyone really throughout the school year. In my role as a school board member, I'm embracing these as we endeavor on many fronts, including the conversation about what might be the best versions of our high schools, how to get there, a superintendent search, and a pilot of participatory budgeting. We also continue to be confronted with challenges that require daily persistence, humility, and courage to confront them. This includes continuing to scale our pre-K program, figuring out before and after care for more families, supporting our students and educators during this youth mental health crisis, and more. We are just at the front of putting in place historic investments to better support students for whom historically schools have not been for. And I look forward to this work having time to come to fruition. Coming back to the superintendent search process and the participatory budgeting process, I want to acknowledge that these are starting, and we're looking for students, staff, and members of the community to join our search committee. We'll be sending out information soon with a short application for those who are interested. We're planning to make appointments at our first meeting in October, so please be on the lookout and reach out to myself, Chair Figdor, or any of the school board members for more information. And that's all for this report. Over to you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Today was the first day of school for the 2022-23 school year for most students, as you heard, in grades 1 through 12. It was awesome to be out in our schools and witness the high level of energy and enthusiasm that I know will carry through the remaining 175 days. I was fortunate to kick off the school year with one of my favorite activities for the past 7 years, which is the walking school bus at Alder and Cumberland next to our central office, to help students get to the bus and see them off to a day of learning at Ocean Avenue School. For 7 years now, this has been a cherished weekly opportunity to see students and build relationships with them and their families. After that, I was able to get out to Portland High, Lyman Moore, and then Presumpscot, Longfellow, and Lyseth. So I had a good chance to be out and see that energy and enthusiasm at play. As you know, and as you heard from Mr. Burke, we did not have school today at both Presumpscot and Longfellow due to the poor conditions at both schools when staff returned last Tuesday. I decided on Thursday to postpone the start of the school year until tomorrow at both schools. Our teachers were placed in an untenable situation because construction continued through the week and not enough work had gone into preparing the buildings for their return. While they worked relentlessly and showed tremendous grit and perseverance, we were simply not ready by the time the week ended for them, which was Thursday evening. I would like to apologize to the Presumpscot and Longfellow communities, staff, students, and families alike for this delay. We've known since day one that we would be asking for patience, sacrifice, and more patience from our elementary school communities as we renovate the 4 buildings for our future sites. However, it was never expected that we would not be able to run school even for a day. So this represents poor communication between the construction staff and our academic team. The ultimate responsibility for that sits with me, and I am exploring the causes and seeking to ensure that we improve dramatically in this area as construction progresses through this year and into the start of the next school year. But I am happy to announce that we are ready to welcome students at both Pres and Longfellow tomorrow alongside our kindergarten and most preschool students and families. Portland Adult Education begins next week, and then we're fully off to the 22-23 school year. I do want to point out that we learned on Friday that the space used for our partnership program at St. Elizabeth Preschool has physical conditions that prevent them from opening to students. We learned today that that is not going to be resolved in time, so we are in the process of finding an alternative space for that pre-kindergarten program to begin. It was scheduled to begin on Thursday with all of our other pre-Ks, and we may need a little bit more time to figure out an alternative space. Ultimately, St. Elizabeth's is, as a partner site, responsible for the physical presence of their building, and the extent to which we've affirmed that that is not feasible at this point has led us to decide to move the students out to an alternative site. So, like districts across the region, state, and country, we've struggled to fill all of our open positions. While we still have a handful of teaching vacancies, I want to highlight the challenges facing our special education programs in particular. We still have a significant number of open teaching and therapist positions, various specialists, therapists, psychologists, and so on. But our most acute need is for our ed tech vacancies. We have put in place plans to respond to the almost 30 vacancies that we still have by making temporary staff reassignments as needed to ensure that we can provide needed services. We've also communicated plans for possible 4-day weeks for students when we no longer have the ability to reassign the necessary staff to make sure that we are sufficiently staffed. One thing that is markedly different and positive this year are our COVID protocols. Consistent with CDC and DOE guidance, we have scaled back our safeguards. Testing will be limited to at-school symptomatic students, and isolation requirements are pared back to 5 days and masking for an additional 5 days upon return. Otherwise, masks remain optional. As I walked around today, I would say maybe 10% of students and maybe a little bit more of staff were wearing masks, and we respect people's option to do that. We urge families and staff to not come to school if symptomatic, and we will continue to send weekly reminders to that effect. We will continue to do daily surface cleaning and promote outdoor meals and instruction to the extent feasible, and keep windows open whenever possible. I am happy to report that Greater Portland Health has procured new vaccines and will be making those available for students beginning in mid-September at all of our school-based clinics and at their other sites in Portland. So after more than 2 years of layers of restrictions, we're happy to be able to rely on the availability of these vaccines, on immunity levels in the community, on medications and science-based mitigation practices to be able to offer a close to pre-pandemic experience to our students. We will remain vigilant and continue to follow the guidance of public health authorities. I do want to take a moment to highlight some of the amazing work that happened in our district this summer. We served over 1,500 students in K through 12 through community partnerships for regular education, special ed, and ELL students that relied on the dedication of 300 plus teachers. Students participated in invitation-based academic programs to bolster students' academic and social emotional skills. After academic opportunities in the morning, students engaged with extended day and even some overnight opportunities, including leadership opportunities like a leadership academy for rising sixth graders, affinity groups for high school students. We also provided tutoring for Portland Housing Authority students at the study centers. And in addition to summer school for middle and high school students, we offered summer reads and accelerated math programming, and we oversaw over 80 internships for students at each of our 3 high schools. We also prioritized camps through our 25 community partnerships that served over 500 students, 90% of them who qualified for free and reduced lunch. Our partners included Ripple Effect, YMCA, Portland Rec, the Boys and Girls Club, Maine Academy of Modern Music, Blue Wave Basketball, Breakwater, PESA, and many, many more. This was a whole community effort, and I'm grateful to all of the partners who joined us to make those recovery opportunities available to all of our students and families. I would like to thank Assistant Superintendent Malia Nally and her team, including Gail Cressy, Molly Myers, and especially Nicole Bradeen, who went straight from summer school coordination to principal at Longfellow. We will have a comprehensive report on our summer school program outcomes later this fall. This coming Thursday, Creative Portland is unveiling a new several art-themed metro stops, including one outside of Deering High School, developed by a PPS graduate as part of their Mayan work entitled Youth in Bloom that features Portland Public School student models. I'm grateful to Creative Portland and Metro for providing this innovative opportunity to showcase our students and our students' talents. Next week, we will officially inaugurate our mobile makerspace. The event will be hosted at Rowe Elementary School, which will serve as the mobile's home base. The event is scheduled for 11 a.m. on Thursday, September 14th. And I would like to recognize our Foundation for Portland Public Schools for their work in procuring funding for this new program. The Brick and Beam Society of the United Way of Southern Maine is the major funder, along with other corporate and private funders. And I must recognize the leadership of our STEM coordinator, Brooke Teller, whose mind and imagination is behind this and so many other STEM innovations in the district. I would also like to extend that recognition from the Brick and Beam Society to all of the United Way of Southern Maine for their other major contributions in support of our work, including the renewal of grants to Talbot Community School for their full-service community school project, and for our Work First and 2 generation programs that are funded at Portland Adult Education. We're grateful to the United Way for their commitment to making Portland better together. Looking ahead, the DOE and Maine Teacher of the Year staff will be on site here on September 15th at Casco Bay to observe and learn about the work of the 9th grade humanities teacher here at Casco Bay, Matt Bernstein. Matt is one of our amazing teachers, and he's one of 4 amazing teachers from across Maine who are finalists in this year's competition. While we're obviously pulling for Matt, we are grateful to the Maine DOE and the Maine Teacher of the Year organization and to Educate Maine for their commitment to identifying and elevating great teaching practice year after year. Just last week, PDK published its annual, I believe it's their 54th PDK Gallup organization poll, which showed, among other things, that the number of respondents who would discourage their children from becoming teachers is at an all-time high, with close to 75% of the respondents answering this way. This highlights the importance and value of the Teacher of the Year programming and continuing to elevate the amazing work that our teachers do. I would like to express my gratitude to the Portland City Council for advancing the Charter Commission's recommendation to recognize the board's preeminent position to both understand the needs of our schools and to represent the community that elected them in setting a school district budget that then needs to be approved by Portland voters. I wholeheartedly support this change and believe that it will increase transparency, efficiency, and democracy. And finally, I would like to extend a fond farewell to Manuel Collazo, the education advisor at the Spanish Ministry of Education and the Spanish Embassy in Boston. Manuel has been a tremendous supporter of our Spanish immersion program at Lyseth for almost a decade. We wish him well in his new pursuits and look forward to working with his successor, Antonio Caballero, for years to come. Mr. Chair, I would like to ask that we move personnel items to the front of the agenda so that we are going to recognize our new principal, our new interim principal at Rowe, who is up for board action. And that way, Ms. Steele, who's had a long day, can move on to other things, and we get to act on that recommendation. So if you will entertain that, we'll have Executive Director for Human Resources, Barb Stoddard, come to the podium.
Oh, I need to make a motion to move. Oh, sorry. Thanks for the tutorial. All right. So, of all personnel items is what we're looking for, or just the one?
I think let's do all of them so that we can just be done with the personnel items, and then we can just move on. And the movement of this to a different part of the agenda is a consent item. So if anybody on the board objects to it, then we would need to not do it. But
okay, thanks for the procedural note. So first of all, does anyone object to moving our personnel items to now instead of later in the agenda? I see no objections. So consideration and action to improve the personnel items listed, election of one-year only teachers. Do I see a motion? Chair Figdor, and a second by Member Russell Pattern. Thank you. Mr. Superintendent, would you please speak to the motion?
Barb is going to do that.
Yes, I will. Tonight, we are bringing forward 9 one-year only teachers for your approval.
Great. Any questions on the motion from the board? I see none. There's no public comment on personnel items. Is there any board discussion? I see none. So by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in favor of the action to approve personnel items listed, election of one-year only teachers.
Ms. Biliou?
Yes.
Ms. Bondo? Ms. Bondo? Okay. Ms. Bryden?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Grant?
Yes.
Ms. Lentz?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Mr. Alzamili?
Yes.
Ms. Diu?
Yes.
Ms. Ellis?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor.
Yes.
So the motion is approved unanimously with students voting with the majority. Now move on to consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed, election of teacher candidates probationary. Mr. Are you speaking to this item as well?
Yes, there are 29 educator candidates for your approval this evening.
Thank you. And I skipped. Is there a motion? Mr. Youssef, is there a second? Chair, Ms. Lentz, thank you. Thank you for speaking to the motion out of order on my wrongdoing there. Any questions on the motion from the board? No. There is no public comment on personnel items. Any board discussion on this item? Chair Figdor?
For these teacher candidates, as well as for the 1 year only teachers, I just want to thank everyone for their service to the district and our students and welcome them.
Thank you. So by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in favor of this item. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Burke. Ms. Biliou?
Yes.
Ms. Bryden?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Grant?
Yes.
Ms. Lentz?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Mr. Alzamili?
Yes.
Ms. Diu?
Yes.
Ms. Ellis?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes.
So the motion passes unanimously, including students' representatives. Now on to consideration and action to approve the personnel items listed. Administrators, is there a motion? Ms. Bryden, thank you. Is there a second? Ms. Lentz, thank you. Mr. Superintendent, will you speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. So today we are bringing to you a motion to appoint Miss Jessica Steele to be the interim principal at Rowe. As you know, we had a fairly late vacancy at Rowe, and we did conduct 2 searches over the course of the summer and did not find a suitable candidate that, from those pools that would be able to go in as the full principal for the future. So we were very fortunate to be able to find Miss Steele, who was in another different pool, and she has agreed to take on the role as the interim principal at Rowe for the remainder of this year. It is our intent to post the position as we do whenever we have an anticipated vacancy sometime late in the winter, so January, early February, and then have a full process and find a full-time principal for the future. But we're incredibly grateful to Ms. Steele, who is an experienced administrator. She holds a certificate of advanced study in educational leadership from the University of Southern Maine, a master's in occupational studies, and a bachelor's in family and consumer sciences from the University of Georgia. She has been the executive director of the Children's Center for 5 years. She's been a principal for 3 years in the Scarborough schools and was most recently a 1-year interim principal, similar situation to our current one in the Westbrook schools. She also has over a decade of teaching experience in Georgia, and she hit the ground running with us over the last couple of weeks. So we're incredibly grateful to Ms. Steele for stepping into this role and ask you to approve her appointment.
Thanks, Superintendent. Is there any questions from the board on this motion? See none. There's no public comment on personnel items. Is there any board discussion on this item? I see none. So by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in, or I'll step in. Sorry, before I go to that, I just want to say thank you, Ms. Steele, for stepping in. Both my students are at Rowe, and I know myself and others are grateful to have you to be part of the team and help us start the year strong and sturdy. And with that said, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in favor of the action to approve the personnel items listed administrators.
Yes, Ms. Biliou,
Yes.
Ms. Bryden,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Grant,
Yes.
Ms. Lentz,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Mr. Alzamili, Ms. Diu,
Yes.
Ms. Ellis,
Yes.
Ms. Santiago,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously with students voting with the majority. And I think Ms. Steele is with us. Would
I
like to
believe
invite her
Ms.
in?
Steele is with us. So, Jessica, if you would be able to just address the board. I think she's remote. So expect to see her pop up on the screen.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Hi.
Yes.
Okay. Hi. So it's a privilege to be joining the Roe community this year. Our teachers, staff, and families have really already been so welcoming over the past week. And today we welcomed over 460 amazing Roe students. We had a really smooth and wonderful opening day. I'm really grateful to Assistant Superintendent Townsend, as well as our fantastic Assistant Principal Joanna Frankel, for their support and leadership during this transition. We have so much to look forward to this year, and I'm really excited to be supporting this Roe community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jessica. And welcome.
Welcome, Jessica. Thank you. And so that's all for personal items, correct, Superintendent? So now we're going back to the report of the Secretary. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, report of the Secretary, consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of August 16th, 2022. Is there a motion? Ms. Bryden, is there a second? Chair Figdor, thank you. Mr. Superintendent, do you speak to this? No, didn't think so. Are there any questions on this motion? I have a note for the request for a friendly amendment to replace Marwa Islami with Maggie Ellis, who's our acting CBHS student rep. Okay. Any public comment on this motion? The action to approve the meeting minutes of August 16th, 2022. Okay. I'm going to close public comment because I see none. Any board discussion on the motion? I see none. And by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in favor of approving the meeting minutes of August 16th, 2022, Mr. Superintendent.
Yes, Mr. Burke. Ms. Biliou?
I was absent.
Ms. Bryden?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Grant?
Yes.
Ms. Lentz?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Mr. Alzamili?
Yes.
Ms. Diu?
Yes.
Ms. Ellis?
Yes.
Ms. Santiago?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously with one abstention, with the students voting in favor with the majority. And with that, we'll move on to consent items. That's to you, Superintendent, when you're ready.
Yep. So under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district as required by that policy. All of the donations are listed in the board agenda under this item. Our practice is for each donor to receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. I would like to thank the generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value and historical or commemorative significance, which this week include Hannaford gift cards for Portland High School, to be used to purchase food for students from April and Dennis Noonan of Portland, Maine, and trumpets that were received by the Lincoln Middle School for their music department. And those came from Gerald Haney of Ocean Park, Maine. As always, thank you to our contributors for their generosity and support of the Portland Public Schools.
Great. So former middle school trumpet player, shout out to that. And thank you for all the donations. Now we're going to move on to board focus on educational issues. And
right.
You're going to lead us through that, Superintendent, correct?
Yep.
Great.
So tonight's board focus is part of our continuing series of data deep dives designed to serve as a foundation to understanding where we stand as a school district as we enter the 2022-23 school year. Tonight, we begin with a look at our student attendance and chronic absenteeism. The presentation will highlight how chronic absenteeism, which has been highlighted as a national challenge over the past few years, is certainly something that we're experiencing as well. You'll also see the link between absenteeism and COVID, particularly this past school year, and Dr. Goodall will provide this presentation.
Good evening, board members and community. Thank you, Superintendent Botana. So as Superintendent Botana mentioned, we'll be going through the chronic absenteeism and attendance slides tonight and showing you the trends over time starting in 2008 by grade span level, and as usual, broken down demographically by the subgroups, and we'll be comparing ourselves to other districts in the state for which we have data. So the key takeaways, which you'll see throughout the presentation, are that all the grade spans experienced higher chronic absenteeism, especially in 21-22. Just a quick note, reminder that 1920, we ended the school, not ended the school year, sorry, we went remote late March, and then in 2021, school was largely hybrid for most of the year, especially at the secondary levels. And so the data will, there'll be some things that I'll point out along the way regarding that. But it will seem strange to how 2021 compares to 21-22, but keep that in mind. High school, we'll see, especially upperclassmen, have the highest rates of chronic absenteeism. And as we've discussed in the previous presentations, Hispanic students, that trend has still continued to show that they're the most impacted group, racial group. And attendance, we'll look at the difference between that and chronic absenteeism and see that the divide is not as severe. Next slide, sir. So what this shows is our chronic, the first graph is our chronic absentee levels week by week, mapped on top of our COVID cases week by week for school year 21-22. So the large spike was late December, early January in COVID. And as you can see, there's a slight lag, and then our chronic absentee rates tick up, especially at secondary, middle school, and high school. And then there was another spike towards the end of the year, late May, which is somewhat reflected in elementary and middle school, but less in high school. One thing to note about chronic absenteeism is that a student is defined as chronically absent if they are present less than 90% of the time. And what that means, especially at high school, is if a student is at school but present for less than 50% of the day, they're considered absent for the whole day. And so high school is calculated different. Well, sorry, in reality is different from middle and elementary, which is just either you're present the whole day or not. Attendance is taken once a day in those places. And as you accumulate more days, there's more runway for you in terms of being chronically absent. So that spike at the end, it's not strange that there's not as big of a jump, because by then, at that point in the year, many more days have passed. Slide next. And so this is similar, same graph on the bottom, but on top, that is our attendance. So our daily attendance rates, what percentage of students are in school on any given day. And then this is week by week. And so, of course, you can see the attendance severely impacted by the spike in COVID, where you see less of an impact in chronic absenteeism because, again, it's the accumulation over days. But this shows it very clearly that during that time period, many of our students, especially high school, were not present. Next slide. And then this is just putting those things together. The chronic absenteeism on top and daily attendance below, so you can see how the trends reflect there. Next slide, thanks. So again, that was only 21, 22. So you can take a close look at what happened over time there. And so now we'll be zooming out and growing year by, so you can see the trend over time from 17, 18 to last year. Sorry, and this is what I just went over. But again, the only thing additional is that you have to be in school for a minimum of 10 days to be considered chronically absent. And the other thing to note is chronic absenteeism, you can still be chronically absent even if all your absences are excused. So truancy, excused absences matter, not in the case of counting chronic absenteeism. And we are using the definition that the state uses. So these numbers are what we report to the state as well. So what this shows is that since 2017-18 to 2021, where we as a school district stack up against other districts, and this is what the state reported. So this is, anyone can go on the state website and find this information. I've just put it together here, and the comparison districts, for those of you who are newer board members, these are the other districts that we often compare ourselves to because they are more similar in demographic composition and size to us, but as I think many of you know, also not similar at all, which you'll see in some of the data and what's reported and what's not. We are a very unique district within the state of Maine.
Gavin, maybe because we have a lot of people in attendance today who might not be able to see this slide, maybe you could describe what the slide says.
Absolutely. So we are the yellow line in the middle third from bottom in 2021. And so you can see our chronic absenteeism rate in the school year 2021 was 23.6, whereas Lewiston was 41.6, and then the lowest one, the lowest bar in there is a statewide average across all districts, which was 20.9. And that's just for year 2021. You can see that there's some fluctuation over time, but we are mostly in the same place with this group of comparison districts, and close to the state average for most years. Right. And so this is now going back just to Portland Public Schools. These are our chronic absenteeism rates for the last several years. Please note that 21-22 was not on the previous graph. We don't have statewide data for that yet, but we imagine that we'll see similar trends in the other districts, but we'll present that data when we have it. So as I mentioned before in the takeaways, high school is where we see the greatest number of students who are chronically absent, followed by middle school and then elementary. And the trend over time, as noted before, was that chronic absenteeism is up across all grade levels. There is that blip in 1920 where middle schools overtake high schools in terms of chronic absenteeism. And I drew your attention to that earlier, 1920 being the year COVID started. And so reporting in the spring once we went hybrid, and in 2021, we were figuring it out still in terms of representing how to report whether students present or not when they're remote. And so, that data is probably slightly less accurate than the other years, but we did our best in terms of reporting. Schools did their best in terms of reporting what they could, but there were some inconsistencies across schools, especially at the high school level. And then this is a difficult slide to read, but the takeaway as presented earlier is that those bars at the top, the 49.3 and the 48.2 and the 40, those are upperclassmen, except that our pre-K data, the 4-year-old is actually the second from top 4, 21, 22. So our pre-K program saw the most dramatic increase in chronic absenteeism from 2021 to 2022. But otherwise, consistently over the years, it's our 11th graders and 12th graders, followed by our 8th graders, and then 9th graders. So this slide breaks it down by race over time at the different grade span levels. So you can see, as we referred to earlier in the takeaways, that our Hispanic students, our students who identify as Hispanic and Latinx, have the highest chronic absentee rate across the district. And that's consistent across every grade span level, and most notably at high school. And then our Black and white students, while for our white students, we see very similar trends in the district. Our Black students seem to defy that trend, especially at elementary school and middle school, in terms of the trend from 2021 to 21-22. And instead of their chronic absenteeism increasing, like other racial groups, there is decreased or stayed pretty flat, except in high school where it ticked up, but not as much as our white students. Next slide there, sorry. And so just for 20, so that was over time. This is a similar look, but across more subgroups and just for 21-22. So that first graph, that alarming bar at the top for high school chronic absenteeism, are students who identify as American Indian or Alaska Natives. There are 9 students that make up that group there for high school. So small sample size, but still something that we wanted to note and let you know that we are aware of that population's very high chronic absentee rate at the high school level. And then what you see below that, broken down by race, again shows our other racial groups and their chronic absenteeism. So that's what you saw on the previous slide was a racial breakdown, but the thing that's new here is our students who are identified as English language learners or multilingual learners, the exit DDL population, and the never EL. And you see there, that our EL students have the highest rate of chronic absenteeism at the high school level. And then our SPED students there's a significant gap there, as well as with our students who identify as economically disadvantaged, the gap being the largest there between our students who identify as economically or qualify to identify as economically disadvantaged at the high school level. This is the same thing, but by middle school chronic absenteeism. So similar trends. The economically disadvantaged gap is a bit smaller and more in line with the gap that you see in SPED, but similarly, we see our Hispanic students and our students of 2 or more races having the highest rates of chronic absenteeism. However, what's different in middle school and high school is that our never ELs and ELs have similar chronic absentee rates. So we took so the chronic absentee band. So we decided to take a deeper look to understand of our students who are chronically absent, how often are they absent? So that bar of 90%, being present 90% or more of the time, there's a lot of variation below that 90%, right? You could be absent 89% of the time, or 5% of the time you could be present. So we wanted to look at some wide-ranging bands just to see, how bad it is at each grade span level in terms of students being missing. So this is the district overall. So what this is, quick thing to calibrate on is what's represented here are just students who are chronically absent. Students who are not chronically absent are not shown here. So of the students who are chronically absent, about 70% of them are in attendance 80% of the time or more. So they're in school between 80 and 89% of the time. So the majority of our chronically absent students have attendance rates 80% or above. And then 70%, between 70 and 80%, about 16.4% of the time, and below 70%, 15.44. Again, this is across the entire district, so elementary, middle, and high school. So we wanted to break this down further by high school so you can see where that's different. Elementary school, same trends apply in terms of elementary school. We have our highest rates of attendance, whereas the students who are chronically absent, about 80% of them are in school 80% of the time or more. But high school, we see differently. So we have kind of two issues at high school, right? So we have high rates of chronic absenteeism, and our students who are chronically absent, about half of them are absent, are present less than 80% of the time. And if you look at the green bar, which is present less than 70% of the time, almost 30% of our high school students who are chronically absent have those very low rates of attendance. Next slide, thanks. So that was chronic absenteeism. So now we'll look quickly at attendance over time in a similar manner. And there will be differences, right? So that chronic absentee population is a subgroup of this and included within these statistics. So, so you'll see that there are differences, very similar trends, but the gap is smaller between elementary, middle school, and high school in terms of daily attendance than you'd see with chronic absenteeism. So our students who are not chronically absent are attending very often, and you see that reflected here. So the at elementary school, daily attendance is broken down here by the demographic groups mentioned earlier. You can see that our highest rates of attendance are by students who identify as 2 or more races, followed by our white students and most races grouped together, and our Hispanic students having the lowest average daily attendance for the year in 2021. And since kind of 2018-19, that group has had lower attendance rates. And then EL status, you see, were very similar for last year. For elementary school, same with economically disadvantaged students and students with IEPs. And then middle school, same thing. We see similar trends to elementary school with more differences in racial groups, but similar with EL status and economically disadvantaged groups in terms of annual rates of attendance, but more of a gap in students with IEPs here. Sorry, and then high school, daily attendance, you see the gaps are smaller, but more noticeable here than in middle school and elementary school in each subgroup. Questions?
Any questions from the board? Chair Figdor?
Gavin, I'm wondering if we know that the disproportionality that we see in Portland, I wonder if we know if those trends are evident in neighboring school districts as well.
In fact, Derek, we have a slide that I can send to you and we can post, but the state does share that data when possible. And so the gaps are definitely as wide and mostly wider in other districts, but many of the other districts can't report on different racial groups. And in fact, the ones that can, like Lewiston with their Black students, didn't for 2021. We're not sure why, but the state doesn't have that data, but in previous years, it was much higher than us and similar for other subgroups as well. So yes, we have some data, but it's hard to compare us to them. But in the places where we can, you see very similar trends with other districts being much higher than us, especially in 2021, South Portland had very large increases in chronic absenteeism, which I'm sure they have ways to explain, but we don't know what those things are, but we can share that with you. But there was nowhere which I think one thing that is worth mentioning, there was nowhere where we said, yes, we are in a far worse place than these other districts, which is not something that comforts us, but something that we noticed when we looked, and I'll share that.
Thank you. So, Member Grant.
Thank you. Slightly tangential to this, but do we have data on numbers of dropouts and how these trends correlate with kids who ultimately leave altogether?
Dropout wouldn't necessarily be the best way to look at it. Truancy would be better, and just because in order to register a student, at least in high school, and here assistant superintendent Townsend could say more. But to officially drop out, there's a long process. And if a student just doesn't show up the entire year, they're not necessarily considered a dropout unless we know that they left the district. So
I assume you have truancy numbers.
We do have
so-
truancy.
okay.
Yeah.
Can I also just add to that, we also have data that looks at what, how do we know if students are ready for post-secondary education as part of our BAR study. And, that shows, that there are a set of indicators that are sort of the markers of where somebody is not going to be ready. And it's attendance is one, discipline, obviously failing core classes as freshmen. Those are the types of indicators. So by all, indications, poor attendance would be one of the ways that we would know, one of the reasons why somebody might not be ready for college when they graduate.
I guess I'm just trying to get at how many kids we're losing altogether.
Right.
Like chronic absenteeism implies that kids are still trying to go. Who's just completely falling through the cracks.
Yeah, I mean, there is a data report on dropout. I don't have it. It's relatively a small number of students. So
Yeah, I'd be interested to see. I know it's, like I said, it's a little tangential to tonight, but thank you.
Yeah.
And just, so we know that, that one, that 18.82%, we could dig further to see what percentage of the, are they attending 20% or 0% of the time? So we can hopefully say at most 18.87% of kids, but if there's, yes, and we'll present on what Superintendent Batana talked about later in the year, but we can certainly dig deeper.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Yeah, Chair Figdor.
I guess this question is for Superintendent Batana. And, when I look at this data, there are numerous factors that are going to play into this, but looking at the disproportionality, I'm thinking about the ways that school isn't welcoming or safe or engaging or relevant for our marginalized students. And I wonder if Superintendent Batana can speak to some of the recent changes we've made and investments we made that might help address that this year, and what else needs to be done.
Yeah, it's obviously a good question and a big question to answer. Clearly, the extent to which students don't feel that they're welcome at school is one of the reasons why they may not be attending. I do think that it's important. One of the reasons that we spent a significant amount of time trying to show the relationship between COVID and that chronic absence data is that, we have had some pretty dramatic circumstances that have contributed to those numbers. And I think it's also why we want to make sure that that the board understands that this is not a unique to Portland issue, that other communities across this, across the state, across the country struggle with that same issue. Having said that, obviously, the work that we've been doing to ensure that students have a meaningful connection with a caring adult is central to our understanding of what it takes for us to, to actually be the kind of place that kids are coming to, and that they're connected and learning while they're there. So, that work, the increase in social work investments, in our youth development work, and things along those lines are a central part of that. We have, through our partnership with BAR, spent a considerable amount of time over the past couple of years really trying to understand what are the early warning indicators for students, falling off track. And so, that work is really being elevated through the work that Pamela Otunu is doing now for the district in terms of helping us to really operationalize those early warning indicators and acting on the early warning that they provide. provide. So I think that, that's work that Gavin and his team have really worked to help us create a dashboard that, lets us know who is, according to the data, less likely to be successful down the road so that we can actually act on that. And it is, a central part of what our school teams do is, every one of our schools has some form of student support team that is looking at this data on an ongoing basis and trying to understand who is, chronically absent and how many, who's chronically absent because they've had, lots of COVID incidents, either themselves or within their family at a time when that was, a big reason why kids couldn't come to school versus, are, working or disconnected from school and things along those lines. So, for us to actually understand who those students are, who is that 18% of students at the high school, 18% of 40% of the kids at the high school that are, showing up less than 70% of the time. That's a big part of it. So, as I said, that's not a simple, answer to what isn't a simple question. Unfortunately, as you know, from all of this work, there isn't there's no silver bullet that we have that otherwise we would be using to actually act on that. Obviously the academic work that we've been doing is critical to that. We think the extent to which kids see themselves in the curriculum, the extent to which the curriculum that we provide is engaging and rigorous is a big part of that. We'll talk a little bit later about, some of our performance data, particularly at the high school around AP and things along those lines that are also sort of contributors to having kids motivated and engaged to be and stay in school.
Thank you.
Member Lentz?
Yeah, Gavin, I was just curious around the pre-K numbers. Like I recognize that population hasn't been able to be vaccinated fully, and I wasn't sure if that was a COVID correlation or if we know kind of anything about what happened there in those numbers.
Again, there's national data that, the increase in pre-K absenteeism was particularly marked. I think the lack of vaccines was a part of that, but that was also true for, kindergarten, first and second grade. If you look, pre-K attendance and K attendance tends to be the highest absenteeism in elementary schools in Portland and across the country. So it is, a function of, lots of different, contextual pieces. I don't know, Malia, if you have any particular insights that you want to share, but otherwise, I do think that this is something that we know is happened nationally and, clearly represented in our data as well.
Yeah. I was just going to say, anecdotally, I have a pre-K son who was absent way more than we wanted him to be, and there are confluence of factors. When he wasn't vaccinated, they're more careful. The pre-K teachers are more careful. When we tried to send him back after following all the protocols, if he had a runny nose, he came back, right? And there were times where the whole class was quarantined several times because of different things. And so I think the pre-K bar was higher in many ways. And I think parents and families were trying to be more careful. So our son would probably be chronically absent, but not through any fault of our. But
just that families don't necessarily. Just a small. Good evening. Hi. Just a small point that families also sometimes see it as more okay to keep their kid home. It's not compulsory, so that's a part of the dynamic that goes into it, and is part of the national trends that are pre-COVID as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? I have one and then perhaps a pontification more than anything else. But when we look at the total district numbers for chronic absenteeism, understanding that it wasn't on your graph because we don't have state numbers yet, I was just trying to get a sense of where we are for 21-22 compared to 2021. And am I okay to just average the 3 levels of school to come up with almost 31% as a district, or is that not good math?
Exactly, because elementary school has more students, it's slightly lower than that. I think we were, I have it, but it's close, yeah, but but lower.
So there's an increase nonetheless, and
Yes,
not an
definitely.
insignificant one, but
Yes.
my math isn't that good. Got it. Okay. I appreciate that. And then no need to like
Okay.
do more on that. I just appreciate having a bearing for where those numbers were going.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did, can you share that? I did ask Aaron to share the slide with our comparison districts by race. And this is the best comparison we can get because my ELED and stuff is even lower. And so just to show you really quickly, we are in the center. And for these groups, for students that identify as Asian, Black, Hispanic, or white, our white population is similar to Bangor and lower than the other districts, and our students of color. Our Black students, their attendance, their chronic absenteeism rates increased from 1920 to 2021, but that's not reported for any other district except South Portland in that year. And we need to reach out to the state to understand why, because they certainly have enough students. So we think data collection must have been difficult for other districts in that year, so 2 years ago. But this is how we've stacked up over time when it was reported. So we've been on the lower end.
Okay, thank you. I'll see if there's a question in this, and I apologize in advance if there's not. I'm just an external processor. For partially, this data seems to give me a place within the ambiguity of the problem, right? Like it's not good,
right,
but it's not good in many places nationally, and it's even worse in some places here in the state. And I'm sure this will be an issue of like research and media investigation. We're going to read about it on the front page of many national outlets and such, but it still leaves this dissonance. And I'm not saying it doesn't to anyone else. That like, I can't just be like, well, this is the status quo and that's okay. Like that's
right,
not how, that's not why I'm here. That's not how I'm walking out the door. And I know it's not why any of you show up any day, but it's like, that's part of where it leaves me in a sense is like, oh, well, I guess there's not much to do about it. It's a national thing. And my day job's focused on these issues related to what's happening for our youth, and just a couple anecdotes, perhaps more than anything else, to highlight. In Franklin County, they kind of took an exercise where teachers, and I'm not saying this is a precise exercise that we should do or anything, just for what it's worth, teachers looked at their student rosters and they went through to identify if a teacher actually like knew a student well, and they found that there were so many that weren't there, and that, you know, compelled action. So data that's out in the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey is of course showing that students feel a rise if they don't matter in their community, they feel hopeless, and they don't have a caring adult in their life. And so that's not okay with me. It's not what I want for, you know, any kid in Portland. I know, again, I'm not saying that's not what anybody wants, but I do look for some more immediate interventions, if possible, towards this.
Yeah, and
just leave it at that.
If I may, because Superintendent Bataan considered specifically, Superintendent Townsend can speak to this too. To your point, we are trying to use the data to help move the needle on this, meaning identifying students earlier, especially at the high school level, especially in ninth grade, as pushed by Superintendent Bataan because of the bar data as 8th and 9th grade being those critical years. And so we're creating tools to track the things he mentioned, grades, behavior, attendance, and trying to put interventions in place earlier, as well as working on some solutions that we've seen research around alerting families when students are absent earlier and more frequently. So it's in the works. We can't say that it's rolled out, but it's certainly, to your point, things that we are thinking about and taking action on, and hopefully we'll be able to report results on soon.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I know nobody is not thinking about this, if that's enough negatives in a sentence, but I'll do my part too to look for things that I could send along, of course, that might be useful, and hopefully we can get to prevention, not just intervention at some point. Thank you.
Thank you,
Dr. Goodall, for, you know, this data slicing that we've never had before, as we say frequently after you present. So thank you, so that we have it rather than not have it, even if it's not stuff that we wish was true. Okay. With that, we'll move into the next item for board education, and I'll just foreshadow after that I'm going to call a little recess so we can be humans with bodies and take care of ourselves for a few minutes. Okay.
Yep, and you will need it after this one.
Okay.
So our second presentation tonight is a deep dive into data around our student academic and opportunity performance outcomes. The presentation is organized around our overall performance and is called for in our equity policy, and consistent with our focus and practice, we will look at the disparity of outcomes for different groups of students. So the presentation will look at longitudinal performance against state standards, provide an in-depth look at longitudinal data on the NWEA, which happens to be the state assessment now for a little while longer, and look at high school SAT performance. We will also dig into two measures of opportunity. That's participation in advanced placement and in gifted programming that are called out as part of our Portland Promise as areas where we want to see increased participation by traditionally underrepresented student groups. This is a fairly dense presentation. We've tried to provide limited examples to illustrate key points rather than provide every possible angle on every one of those points. And I'm going to be carrying the presentation, but Dr. Goodall is available to help answer any questions or dig deeper into some of the data from our dashboard or from our slide appendix. And also, as you can see, Assistant Superintendents Nally and Townsend are here, and they can help us to illuminate points or provide additional illustrations on the data. So if you want to go full screen, that would be great. Okay, so we are today, the way that we're organizing this, if you can go back to the outline, the presentation is going to look, as I mentioned, to performance on those areas. NWA, which is the current state, the state of Maine assessment, advanced placement, course enrollment, SAT test. I'm sorry, this is not SAT test takers. Yeah, it is SAT test takers. And then our Chapter 104, which is also our gifted and talented, the way that's how our gifted and talented program is called. The reason that we organized around this is all of those align with the Portland Promise achievement opportunity areas. And to the extent that we can, we will look at that across different grade spans. So let's start with the performance data. Couple of things that you need to know. The Maine Educational Assessment, or MEA, changes frequently over time. So this slide shows you how, in the last, 7 years, we are now on our fourth version of a state assessment. So as that headline says, it makes it difficult to track performance. So we are fortunate that we have had students taking NWA, which is now the Maine State Assessment. So we're able to do, and you will see some of that in today's presentation, but it does make it difficult. And the state is moving away from using NWA effective next school year. So we will see one more iteration of change in this, in this sequence. So next slide, we're going to dive into a little bit about the NWEA so that you have some background on it. It's, very widely used across the country. Our kids took it prior and have continued to use it almost, consistently throughout, but you will see in a minute that not always. And so, for example, we had no students who took the NWA during the spring of 2019. So you'll see across the board in all of our slides that there's a missing data point. So a line that doesn't have a point because we just moved from, 2018 to 2021. And high school and middle school, there were some years where very, very few students took the test. And so we will exclude those years as well. So you'll see in places where the high school data is not linear sequence. The presentation, even though NWA is administered in many cases fall, winter, and spring, we're going to do spring to spring score comparisons, which is the way that the state assessment and accountability sort of structure is built. So the next slide will just show you illustrate that point that, we had periods of time where very few students took the test, and so we will exclude that. We obviously, the same is true for our high school. So you will notice that we have excluded middle school and high school from most of our NWEA reporting. So next slide. So a little bit more deeper now into NWEA. So the way that we chose, there's multiple ways that you can look at NWEA scores, and we went around and around multiple times on how to do this. And we finally settled on using what NWEA calls a RIT score, which stands for Roche unit scale. And so this is a sort of a common scale across all of the tests, all of the grades, and gives you a scale score range of 100 to 350. That's how scores are placed on the NWEA map scale. And what that does, having this continuous single scale, it allows you, particularly at the school level and at the classroom level, to be able to track a student's progress from year to year and have a general sense of is that student making progress. And so a student, whether they're in third grade or whether they're in 12th grade, is on that same scale. And you can see that. It doesn't quite mean that 170 in third grade is the same as 170 if you are in fifth grade. But it's, so it's for our purposes, it's helpful to just think about that as a single scale that goes all the way through. The next slide shows you that the sort of the norms that we're using for our analysis are built off of the 2020 norming study, as opposed to previous norming studies. It's the most recent one that NWEA did, and the reason we choose to use that one is it's the most recent, but it also captured larger cities with more diverse populations. Traditionally, NWEA was not administered in large urbans, and so it makes sense for us to use it for that reason. So next slide. This is to just show you and try to illustrate how this works on a scale. So basically, I picked that second grade spring norm. What this tells you is that the second grade spring average scores range from about 170 to about 201. So basically, 185.57 is the mean score, and the standard deviation is 15.5. So you add or subtract from that number, and that's what the standard one standard deviation is on that test. So basically 70% of scores on the national test fall in that range. So that overall population that took the test, 70% of kids fell into that range that took that as second graders.
Mr. Superintendent, I'm sorry, can I stop you? Can you explain that standard deviation piece again?
Oh, boy.
Go further. Can we skip ahead?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's right, because we do have we added that this. Can you go to slide 13, Alpha? All right, we added that today. So that's actually not in the presentation. That is in the one that says final is not final because we added that at the last minute. It has been added. You guys are awesome. So, so this shows you the normal distribution of scores, and on any normal distribution for anything that you do, whether it's test scores or height or whatever. If you sort of map that all out with the population, you have what is called a normal curve, which is what you see there, just a curve that goes up and comes down the same way that it went up. And in a normal distribution, close to 70%, 68 and change are, within one standard deviation of the mean, which is the sort of the average score or the average height or whatever it might be. And then you can see what is on either end of that standard deviation, gets to be an increasingly smaller percentage of the population. So within 2 standard deviations, you have 85%, 80, what is it? It's 4. So 70 plus 26, whatever that is, 96. Yeah. Great. How did I do?
Thank you. That was
you wouldn't want me as your statistics instructor, but I can fake my way through a normal curve distribution. All right. Does that help?
Thank you. That was very clear.
Okay. So back to this slide. We just wanted to, sort of caveat some of this, that the 2020 norms obviously were done before COVID, and NWEA has done a very deep look at the impact of COVID on their national performance on their test. And last week you all probably heard about the NAEP scores before there were the NAEP scores, and what people when we were talking about the impact of COVID on performance, it was pretty much everybody was talking about the NWEA impact study, because it is, the largest, it's one of the, as I said earlier, one of the most widely used tests in the country. So they have a huge population of students that take it. And when they looked at, and they also have data that goes back a number of years, and when they looked at how did kids do on NWEA in the 2021 school year, very early in the spring, in the fall assessment, they saw that there was a very significant drop in math scores, not so much in reading. I think that bears out in our data, as you will see as we go along. We're going to jump into talking about how our district compares to other districts on those state expectations, which I know there was a question or a comment made earlier about that. And I do think that it's important to recognize, aligned with what we talked about earlier, because the state test has shifted. You see shifts in performance, so you need to take that with grain of salt. So the way that the state has organized the expectations for the time being, again, they're in the process of changing this test, so it will be different down the road, but they've used at or above state expectations is being within one standard deviation of the mean. So basically what that tells us is that 84% of a comparison group achieved at or above that score. So I think that that's the way to think about it. Basically, only 16% of students in the national sample perform below that level. So it doesn't tell us whether kids are performing at grade level. It doesn't tell us, if they're making growth. It doesn't tell us any of those things that are sometimes in state assessment expectations. It just basically tells us the percentage of our students that were, within one standard deviation using the national norm. So we just went through our next slide, so we can skip it. It should have been earlier, but it was a good call to include it. Okay, so how does our performance compare to the state overall and to other districts? And again, I think it's important to remember that this, you see that jump, which somebody highlighted earlier, that jump is caused by using this, what is basically a much lower standard for meeting state expectations. And so the previous years that are highlighted here were all part of the MEA, right? They were all, so that we had, we had built some continuity of overall performance, and, that obviously shifted when the state shifted to NWEA, and there you can see. So that gives you an idea where the orangish bar in this chart. The state is the green bar. So pretty much we tracked very close to the state average for most years up until the new assessment. And so we're, significantly lower than the state average. And you can see how that's also true for some other districts that tracked closely with the state, that they saw, some decrease in their performance levels. This is math. The next slide is reading. So not as dramatic a shift for us. And again, we tracked very closely to the state prior to the shift to NWEA. Okay. So we want to look at how we've scored on NWEA over time. And I'm going to be honest with you, I almost hate doing this because I've always resisted, trying to put context that makes it seem like we're doing better than we are. And I am, not pleased at all with our scores, but I felt it was important to just spend a minute trying to contextualize. And I think it also not only contextualizes, but it sort of affirms why we've invested as much time, energy, and resources in helping our English language learners. And so, the next slide shows you a distribution of students in mathematics on the left and reading on the right, and it shows you longitudinally the percentage of students that fall into the different quintiles. So basically, the 20% of distribution for students, and it maps that against and so those distributions, just if you look on the right-hand side, you see high, average, low average, and low. Those are the designations in NWEA map for the different quintiles. So, and this is one of the ways that we thought of reporting it, and we decided to go with the RIT scores instead, but it illustrates a point that I think is important to make. And that is that if you look at, and then it maps it against, on the left-hand side, the categories of access. That's how the state measures English proficiency for students. So things like emerging, entering, emerging, developing, expanding, and bridging. And those are the different levels. When you get to expanding is when you are likely to, you usually are exiting ELL services when you get to that level. The levels before that, you're still, in the middle of learning English. And I think what's important to sort of highlight here is that, almost 100% of our students who are below that expanding level are, in the low average or low quintiles of the NWEA scores. In other words, they're very low on this test. This test is not, I'm going to say this, and I don't mean it in the statistical sense. It's not a valid representation of, what students know. It measures what they know in English at a time that they're learning English. And so it is one of the reasons why when we move on and look at some of the performance, particularly some of the subgroup performance, you'll see what is, just really disturbing performance, which is not to take away for the fact that, that we have these gaps. It is to highlight that, our testing system is not, is not designed for a district like ours. So let's move on then to actually looking at our performance. And so we're going to look at elementary and middle school performance on the NWA over time. Again, as we mentioned earlier, we have some continuity in this data, and so we feel fairly, good about being able to show this. And what we've done in the first slide, Aaron. Thanks. Is map our elementary school performance by grade against the national norms. So the light yellow line that you see there is the national norms, and then you see our our grade levels and how they have performed. So overall, you can see that we have seen some marked decreases over time for all levels. I do want to remind you, and that's why we had the slide about the NWA scores. Remember, these are norms that were set prior to COVID. So these do not reflect, the national norms after everybody went through COVID. So if you think about that, in all likelihood, the national norm would also see a significant decrease in subsequent years. But this is, you can see a marked decrease from 2019 to 21, and then you see that it's stabilized in large part in the last year. And so again, this is something that we know from the national data is true, and it certainly is true here. And so we're seeing that. If you look at the middle school performance, you don't see the same stabilization, certainly not the sharp decreases that you see between 18 and 21. Again, here we did not have data for 19 and 20. So you see basically what seems like a continuous line, but it does not have points in it for 19 and 20 because we did not administer the NWA, but we're able to reference it back to 2018 and again see the sharp decrease from 18 and a continued decrease for for this past year. But again, obviously not as sharp as what you see in that 3-year period of time. So let's move on and talk about the gaps. And this is where, as I said earlier, with the context piece that I shared, I think it's also important for us to recognize that, consistent with what we've seen in, other data that we've reported, that we continue to have a significant gap that is by and large, the same or growing for our Black students. And in this, we chose Black students because they have the largest gap. We continue to have gaps for our Latinx students, but they're not as acute as the one that you see for Black students. So this is elementary math, and so you can see what that looks like for by grade and plotted against the national norm. So a takeaway that you could have from this is that our white students, even with the sharp decrease that we've seen as a result of COVID, are tracking close to the national norm. Our Black students were not there to begin with and have continued to slide further. So the next slide shows math at the middle school level. And there, again, you can see that with the exception of 6th grade, that our white students are, staying close to the grade level norm, and that our Black students have continued to fall further and further away. Again, not as sharp a decrease between 2021 and 22 as in, as the prior years. And that's a function of obviously the fact that it was 3 years and that those 3 years included the COVID drop that is, that is noted nationally and is certainly true for us as well. You can see that for our white students, and you can see that with all of our different groups. You'll see in reading, which is next, that those, that the decreases are not as sharp as what we just saw in math, again, consistent with the national data. So this shows you for all grades what performance was in 2018, and then the line where the line exists. And we did not do a line for the 2018, the 1920 years for middle schools, but you can see where we started and where we currently are. And then we're going to look at that also by middle school and elementary school, and mapped against the national norms. So the lines, it's a gray line on the middle school side. It's a, gold line on the elementary side is the mean RIT score. So the average, and then you can see what our performance was like in all of those grades overall. So you can see for the same pattern that we saw earlier, a drop, followed by leveling in this last school year, and, at the elementary school, and, a continued decrease at the middle school. And this is for the totality of all of our students. And then let's look at the disparity data, and you will see the same pattern that you saw in math. In reading, again, with a general sense that the trend has, that we've seen the bottom and are, trending upwards in most areas. When you look at the elementary school, not quite true for Black students at the 5th grade level, but that's what you see there. And in the next slide, which is for the middle school, not quite the same picture. So it is interesting to see that there has been an improvement at the 6th grade level since 2018, both for white and Black students in the 6th grade, and but otherwise the pattern continues to be similar to what we saw in our math scores. Okay, do you want to ask any NWA questions before we move to AP, or do you want me to run through all of this? This was 3/4 of the presentation, so the rest is not as dense, but it also is. We're going to move to a completely different sort of opportunity focused performance. So
we'll pause here and ask questions. Member Better.
Thank you, Chair. Trying to figure out what my question is, Superintendent. Maybe could you just go back to one of the previous slides that shows, I just wanted to look at one of the NWEA scoring. I think I'm just trying to understand, like in this graph when it's showing, so this is the RIT score. So say for 6th grade here, and the Black students at the bottom, just for me to understand between, 205 and what is that, 207, I just don't have a sense of those few points kind of like in the bigger picture, how much of a change that is. So I don't know if there's something you could help with, just like what percentage or.
Yeah, I mean, you can go back to slide 10.
Yeah.
That's the one that has the norms. And there you can reference what the norms were for, for that. So for 6th grade, 215 was the mean score. 231 would have been one standard deviation, the limit of one standard deviation above, and 200 would have been the bottom of that standard deviation. So if you go to back to that slide that we were looking at. which was it middle school? Sixth grade. Is this reading? That's what we were looking at. Yeah, so that gives you an idea.
So, okay, so to go from 204 to 207, I guess I'm just trying to get my head around how much, how much of a change. I mean, I know we're just looking at these few years, but like those few points, like
still within that standard deviation. It's probably, like I wouldn't know like if it spans a quintile or not. I don't, we actually have all of that data.
Yeah.
You want to do a really quick look at the quintile sixth grade math, just to have an idea of where the average score for Black students would place them in the quintile distribution. And maybe we can move on to other questions while we look at.
That's great. I think some of it,
that might take a minute.
That's fine.
Not a way that we've.
I think some of it is just my lack of familiarity with the scoring, like to understand, that change within the bigger picture of score. So I think maybe that's just my needing to get familiar with and looking at the.
I would sort of venture that is not a huge increase or a huge drop. What you see there, so from 210 to 211 is negligible. What you see from 206 to 206.9 to 206.6 is negligible. 204 to 206 is probably not a big deal.
Okay, thank you.
There are other questions while we wait for that? Yeah, Chair Figdor.
Superintendent Batana, you alluded to state changes in the use of the NWEA as an assessment tool. Can you talk more about what those might be?
They're doing a new test, so I don't really know. I have not. It's hard to keep track of what's happening, but I don't know, Malia or Gavin, if you. I know you've been more working more closely with the state on the assessment transition.
Yeah, so there are a few changes and they're happening this spring. So next calendar year, but this school year. High school is typically 11th grade, it'll be 10th grade. But the big difference is, so NWA is an adaptive test. And so when you take the test, it may start you with a grade level question, but if you get it incorrect, it'll give you a less rigorous question, for example, or after a few times. Or similarly, if you keep getting them correct, it'll give you higher levels, which is why you can see us exceeding the norms in some places. The state has asked them to, so basically created a Maine test. So it's still NWA, same NWA bank of questions. However, instead of being widely adaptive, where you could go, if you're in 7th grade, you could be getting questions on, that's a bad example because the test goes 2 to 6 and then 7 to 12. The point is, if you're in 5th grade, you could be getting 2nd grade questions. Or if you're in 2nd grade, you could be getting 5th grade level rigor questions on the current NWA, the typical one. The new one, they're going to kind of box us into more to grade level work. So students will have less access to those questions at lower or higher levels. And that is to ensure that we're testing grade level proficiency more so. So it's still somewhat adaptive, but not nearly as much, but still based on same types of items.
And then can you remind me, I know we're required to give this test. Are we required to give it multiple times in the year?
Twice a year.
Twice a year.
With the option to take it.
I mean, one good thing that came out of this is, a slight savings for us, and that, a test that we paid for before is now, paid for by the state. So that was a good thing.
Great. And Dr. Goodall, did you have that other piece of information, or should I go to Member Bilu for her question?
Unfortunately, we deleted it from the original slides.
Okay.
I could pull up Tableau, but they don't want to see that. That's going to be a mess.
That can be.
We'll get you.
But I will say to your question, or there's more variation within our grade level than between grade levels. So if you look, especially at middle school, the grade level norms only differ by a few points, but within a grade level, there's a much wider range. So even though to Superintendent Batan's point, there was a 15-point difference in RIT scores within 1 standard deviation for 6th grade, if you look at the 7th grade mean, it's like 3 points higher. And so it's helpful to know in a sense that it is very hard to tell between grade levels what something means, or even within a grade level. But just to reiterate, that standard deviation being 15 points tells you how widely the scores are distributed. And so 3 points is not much. But more than 15, then you're like really scratching your head.
Thank you. Member Bilu, did you have a question? No, not that.
No, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I think I went to the bathroom during this, but can you just clarify the multiple tests or testing programs that we've gone through? I'm still stuck on the SAT era. So if you could, I would like a little bit of information. It's like the first thing.
Yeah. So I think it's, there we go. So that slide shows you the evolution, over the past 7 years. So from 2015 to 2019, the state administered something that was called Empower Me at grades 3 through 8, and they gave SAT was the required test for high school students. That was the only test that high school students took. And so they took that in the 11th grade, and it served to both, sort of give the state an idea of how districts were performing, but it also served as a, guarantee that all of our students would take the SAT. So in 2019-20, when they shifted to NWA, they also stopped administering the SAT. We're going to talk about SAT in a little bit in terms of the numbers of students who have taken the test and, performance on the test. So we're going to go into SAT if that's what you're curious about.
Okay.
Right now, we've been primarily focused on talking about the NWEA, which our high school students are now taking because it's part of the state assessment, but we don't have a strong continuous line because they virtually didn't take it from 2017 until 2020.
But the middle schoolers did?
With an interruption in 2018, 19, and 19, 20. They did not. So that's why you see in all of our reports that you have like 2018, and then you'll see, 2021 and so there's no points for the years in between.
And was there a reason why the state decided to go a different route, or?
I'm not the person to answer that question because my cynicism will come across. So I would, defer to my distinguished colleagues who deal with this more closely.
I can't speak to before I was here. So just last year and this year, I think a couple of the reasons I've heard is that lots of districts were already using NWA, so they thought this would be a good test to switch. So I'm not sure what the issues were with the MEA, why they wanted to switch at all. And then last year, they engaged many districts. Jesse Robinson, our director of curriculum and assessment, was a part of it, where there were many leaders from districts where the state was asking us, what do we want in a state assessment? And there were lots of different opinions. However, that's why they're changing it this year, is based on that conversation. I think a lot of people said here, there's some things that we really like about the NWA, but there's some things that we don't love. And one of them was, the lack of grade level content. And so this was in response to feedback from districts. Our own stance is potentially different from that. And our care and love for the NWA is different with every district. But They were trying to listen and be responsive. I think Superintendent Batali can say more, but may choose not to about the SAT, the 11th grade in particular. We didn't discuss that with this state group, but I have no idea why they dropped the SAT.
Another question that you don't have to answer if you can't, but have you guys seen like this be able, or like has this been able to like disrupt students getting into college, like because of the requirement for certain testing?
The lack of SAT, most schools with the pandemic made SAT optional. So as a result, it probably hasn't disrupted any, and you'll also see in our data in a couple minutes that we still had a ton of kids that took it. So, we didn't, it wasn't offered by the state where it was universal, but, a significant number of kids still wound up taking it.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
And we're going to get what Member Russell Better asked for. We can get that later.
Yes, thank you. Member Lentz?
I'm still kind of like swirling over what the thought is in my head, but I guess the slide 18 that shows kind of like English language learners and how they're at such a disadvantage, but are still asked to take this test that was not built for them in the system that was not built for them. And that like my anecdotal knowledge is that the number of English language learners within the district has been increasing over time. And so I guess I'm curious, I would love to see that overlay because my gut is telling me that there's something there, right? And if we're reporting on this data that is from a system that wasn't or isn't accessible, like how do we hold those things together?
Yeah, and we have talked about coming back with data that more finely looks at students who are, Black students who are bridging and expanding, and just pulling that population, just to sort of contextualize it. About 60% of our students who are English language learners are in the developing, emerging, and entering categories, and another 40% are in that other bucket. And so I think that there's you can see like the percentage of students who are in those categories, particularly in bridging, which means that they've left the program, which is a small percentage of our students. I do also want to point that out, that, significant number of those students are in the, average to high, categories. So I think that is, that sort of makes the point that those kids tend to do, well, once they are, once they are able to, they've mastered English.
And just to double check for my own knowledge, every student takes the test.
Pretty close. Every student is required to take the test. Okay. I have.
And is there any modification or accommodation given to English language learners? No.
It's an adaptive test, so I am not sure what accommodations are provided. Are they given extra time on NWEA?
Only if they have an idea.
They would have to advocate for that, right?
For our students who are in the country for their first year that are English language learners, don't take the reading test. So for example, we had 70 of our ELL students take the math test, but 41 take. So they're required to take the math test, but not the reading test, just in their first year. And so, but just quickly to answer your question, or before we share more data with you, for middle school, 247 students, Black students, were designated English language learners that took the test versus 117 Black middle schoolers who were designated never EL. So a much larger number of students, or exhibit EL is a smaller group. So, but with that said, and we can share this with you if you'd like to go more on this, there are gaps between our never EL Black students and our never EL white students, but not as large as you would imagine, as for the when you include the ELs, which is what you saw, including them.
Yeah. I guess I am also just to humanize this, like that probably doesn't feel very good to go in to have to take a test that you know you're not going to do well at. And just thinking about chronic absenteeism and how all these things are overlapped, like, yeah. Not a problem we can fix tonight, but just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Member Lynch.
Yeah.
Before I go to you, Chair Reps, if I could build on the humanization, I've been sitting here curious to our student reps. How does it feel? This is a summative statement of your life over the last few years and these data points in some ways. I'm just curious if there's anything you'd like to add to our discussion about this evening.
Yeah, I mean, this is the NWA is a test that I feel like I've taken my whole life at this point, like so many times. And I feel like as you get older, it last time I took it, I just kind of remember feeling, because as far as I know, it's not a test that gets sent to colleges or anything. It's really just for your own, for the benefit of understanding where students are at. And it does feel a little strange taking a test and knowing that it's really only to view you as a data point. It's not really anything that's benefiting, on a large scale, it is benefiting you, but not anything that really directly relates to you, if that makes any sense. It's a little strange, coming to terms with that. I understand that there are definitely reasons that we, take it on a larger scale, but I don't think that those are really reasons that a lot of students see the immediate effects of or anything like that. So, yeah, I don't know if you had anything you want to add, but
no, yeah, I would second everything that she said. I think I've known that it was kind of like a test to take to see where everybody's at and look at for data, which I guess looking at it now is kind of weird because I was always nervous about it. Oh my God, I got to do the best I possibly can. Thinking, I guess it was going to be graded, even though I knew it wasn't. It kind of felt like a lot of pressure, but
yeah.
Yeah.
When I was in elementary school and middle school, because I think at that point, I don't know if it was just something that my schools and my teachers were allowing, but they would let me because I would get very worried about these tests and I would spend hours on them because the questions get harder. And I didn't feel like it was an option to just, choose an answer randomly. And so I would just spend hours and hours on these tests and it would eat up days of my, so much of my free time because I was so I just felt like I couldn't, flub these tests or whatever. And looking back, that was a really bad way to spend my time, but I was in elementary school and it felt really important. So, yeah.
I mean, I think in theory, the tests are supposed to be used by teachers to understand where you are, not only, in relation to other students, but in relation to where what they're teaching, the curriculum is. I know that one of the challenges that we've had with it, and I think it's one of the reasons, as Dr. Goodall mentioned, that the state is moving away from the current composition of the NWA, is the fact that it doesn't have that curriculum alignment. It doesn't measure the stuff that you're supposed to learn in 7th grade or the stuff that you're supposed to learn in 8th grade, because it is an adaptive test. And if you flub the first couple of answers, it starts asking you 3rd grade level questions, or it doesn't go straight to 3rd grade, but it'll work its way down there. So, I think that those are I think that I totally can understand how from a student's perspective, you're just taking these tests over and over. Mm-hmm. It's it's spring, therefore, it's fall. So I'm going to take the test. It's winter. I'm going to take the test. It's, spring. I'm going to take the test. And, I think that we've done a lot of those things.
Mm-hmm. I'll also, last year when we were taking the tests in the fall, we took the NWEAs directly after taking the PSATs, which was a really weird, just timeline. I mean, that's just kind of a side note, but it was a little bit of a strange contrast directly with a test that
is
felt very
important.
Yeah, more important and had applications that I feel like we could see a little bit more clearly just then taking this one.
Yeah.
That was required, you know, it was.
Yeah, you couldn't say like, yeah, I already took the other
Yeah.
test. Yeah.
Like I took this one and I feel like that, you know, gave me an understanding of like, that was what I felt like was a measuring what I'd learned. And then we took a different test. But yeah, anyway.
Thank you both for answering that. I saw Member Bilu put a hand up before, and Chair Figdor, and now Member Bryden.
Go. You had
Oh.
your hand up before.
Okay.
I was just gonna add to what they were saying, honestly.
Please go ahead, and then we'll progress from there.
Yeah, no, I definitely echo what they were saying. I don't know if we're going to discuss the access test here, but that was like, so when I was in high school for all 4 years, I was an ELL student, bridging or half mainstream through like junior and senior year. And you had to take the access test no matter what you were doing or where you are, even if you had been in mainstream like that whole year and you didn't take any ELL classes, you still had to take the access test. And I think for me, what was really daunting about both the access test and the SAT was, like you said, a lot of the things that were on it weren't what we were learning in our classes. So it was just like, it was kind of white culture almost. Like we're literally being put into spaces where we're supposed to know things we literally never had any capacity to like understand. Like I remember there was a question on the access test that was like talking about the turtle migration, and I was like, where would I have learned and like any capacity to understand this? And this was a test that literally was taken by mostly ELL students. So it's like only ELL students. So it's like, where are they going to learn this if it's not being taught in the classes they're not even able to go through, because they have to be mainstream to have access to earth science or some of those like college, like, sorry, I'm like losing the terms, but college oriented classes where you have to be at that level to be able to have access to those classes. And then with the SAT, it was essentially like a finance thing. Like you literally had to have money to get the resources to get the training constantly. Like I went into a Make It Happen program. Like Make It Happen had an SAT program, and that's where I was able to get resources to even study for the exam or to even study for the test. And like all of those tests, every single time I took them, I felt very dumb. I felt very uneducated, and I felt very discouraged. Like the anxiety was insane. I honestly felt like I've had more anxiety there than even like before a basketball game or before like a cross country meet. Like it was, and almost all my friends that went to Portland Public Schools that I'm still friends with now that were in ELL during that time had that same feeling of like it just being like, even students that were in AP classes weren't like passing their access tests, and they weren't doing well in their SAT testing. Like I got into all my schools and I did so bad in my SAT testing. So I think it's just like really trying to see like how can we, the things we actually teach these kids, how can we then test them on those? Because I think there's so much issues to like having an independent testing program that doesn't really have a lot to do with your school or school district. But I think that's where we really need to support students of color, because that's really where like the stereotypes and just like some of those like discouraging moments are reflected, is like in that testing room. Like even seeing mainstream kids like get up before me or like before us and like be able to be done, and you just like being literally stuck in one question for like 30 minutes. It was just like a daunting experience, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. The access point is one that, I feel like, one of the things that we've been able to achieve over the past, few years is to, because of the voices of students in Portland, by and large, although, also some other students that were part of Seeds of Peace and so on, to advocate to the state to change the cutoff that was used for having to continue to take the test. And so, Maine had a prohibitive, cutoff. What was a 6 on the scale? You had to score at the top of the scale in order to be able to not have to take the test anymore. And so, over the years, that's changed where it's now a 4.5. And so that makes it where you're in the middle of the expanding level is where you are allowed to no longer take the test. So and that's largely student voice at work. So something that's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I just would like to add on also. I have noticed something that I remember distinctly kind of noticing on the NWEA and I guess PSAT too, but I just want to specifically say NWEA is that a lot of the questions on there, I remember noticing at some point where sort of just things that I feel like especially on the reading and writing section, kind of things questions about grammar and parts of speech that a lot of the time I feel really were only things that mostly just the weird intricacies of English, as a language that mostly only native English speakers would know. And I remember, growing up, I had a lot of friends that weren't native English speakers. And I'm this, the test is required, but these aren't even really things that, it just feels like it's measuring something that's not, really
Thanks.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that. I'm gonna, Ms. Bride, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. This is another thing that we're not going to solve tonight, and it's a combination question and expression of bafflement, I think. But the NWEA, is that really not offered in a translated version, especially for the math? Is that not?
It isn't. And we don't have, we don't have a single language. It's not, a school district where, 80% of the English language learners are Spanish speaking or something. There's oftentimes a lot of tests that also have a Spanish version, but not so many that have a French version or
any number of
languages. And then I think the other thing that's really important to understand about testing in, even in a student's native language is the students aren't being taught in that native language. And so the content that they are having access to is predominantly in English. And so to ask people to do, a history test in a language that they don't learn in is also problematic. So it's not just as simple as translating the test.
Okay. Again, not going to solve today.
Looking at other ways of assessing what, students are doing. And, this is for another day, but the work that we're doing around our, assessment strategies around, relating to what it is that kids are actually learning in school and, common tests that are based on the curriculum that we teach as opposed to something that's, a normative example from across the country. So, those are the kinds of things that actually move us in a different direction. But these external measures of accountability are likely to continue to exist, and we're going to continue to have to take them. But, for us to really understand our kids, able to do the work that they need to do is that's where our assessment work is heading.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair Figdor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to acknowledge all that Ms. Bilyeu said and how powerful it is and how much it connects to our earlier conversation, our initial board focus. And Ms. Bilyeu, thank you for sharing all that. It's incredibly powerful to me. I guess was similar to what I had been thinking. I mean, one other aspect that we haven't talked about is there's any NWEA tests like science that our students take as well. I'm not sure if there's other ones in addition to science.
Our kids do not take NWEA science. They're still administering the Empower Me science.
Okay. but they're taking another standardized test that probably
That's because the federal law calls for assessing students in reading and math, and then once in every grade span in science. So that's why, all of our third, fourth, and fifth graders, all of our third through eighth graders take the reading and math test, but only, I don't know what it is now, fourth grade takes science.
I think it's
fourth and then,
fifth grade, and yeah.
So get my states mixed up.
And for reading and math, federal law doesn't require an assessment every year, does it? It's federal
Annual
law.
assessments in English.
And then how did the law change? Because how did
still the 2019-20 year, the U.S. Department of Education gave a national waiver to states to not administer a test.
And then what about when we did Empower Maine? That was just for grades 3 to 8, and the SAT was one time for high school.
Once in high school. That's that. I'm sorry. It's every year through from third through eighth grade, and then at least once in high school.
Oh yeah, which is why I only do it once.
Because
Malia's chatted that science is 5th and 8th and 11th, just so we have those notes.
So, I mean, my point being, in addition to all of the negativity that Miss Bilyeu described, and how that makes our students, a test that they're that's set up for them not to succeed at and doesn't actually measure what they're learning, how that makes students feel, but also the time. It's just a tremendous time suck to do all of the NWEA testing plus the access test. I know the access test is incredibly time consuming. So all of that is taking away from actually educating our students. So, I mean, I know that that might be obvious, but just to state it.
Okay, I'm going to acknowledge you, Member Grant. I just want to say that we still have a quarter of a presentation to go through. We've got 3 old business items to go through. So after Member Grant, I'd like to get the train back on moving. So, Member Grant.
All aboard.
Yeah. Thank you.
We've obviously been able to poke a lot of holes in the test. What I want to know is, what are the real world consequences to these testing scores? I know they're diagnostic and it helps us assess where we are. Are there other consequences tied to these scores? I'm really just trying to figure out if we should actually do something about it, at the state level or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I think
funding tied to this or some other thing that we care
about. Not in a negative way. So I think that there is, I know, that performance, poor performance on these tests usually comes with additional resources to sort of to get better on them. So from that standpoint, there is, I guess, perverse incentives to not do well on these tests. Not that anybody is doing that on purpose. I think, Member Bilyeu and Member Ellis's, points, right, about, how people internalize the experience of doing the test is real life, meaning as well.
I don't want anyone to take my question to dismiss that. I just wanted to know if there were in another channel where there.
Yeah, in terms of there's no, as Ms. Hella said, the NWA is not sent to, the schools that you're applying to. It is primarily used for diagnostic and, to the extent possible, instructional purposes where it's more aligned to the actual content of what students are learning. And I can't think of any other way that it's used.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all. And as Assistant Superintendent Nolly will attest from the curriculum committee, I'm happy to get deep in these conversations for a long time. And I particularly appreciate Member Bilyeu and our student reps giving voice to what this means for them, in addition to the presentation we've looked at so far. And Superintendent, I'm going to bring it back to you for the remaining quarter of the presentation.
All right, so we're going to move to AP. And the reason, again, just that we're doing AP and we're doing the Chapter 104 is because in our Portland Promise, we specifically called out those two places as opportunities for us to expose students to more, to more rigorous, advanced coursework. And, I think that I mentioned earlier the bar data that, says these are the things that show us the kids are not ready. One of the things that shows us the kids are ready is their participation in advanced placement type classes. So that's why we place a premium on trying to get more and more of our students to take these classes, because it challenges them to take courses that are going to be more like what they're going to face when they go on to post-secondary learning. So the first slide just shows you our percentage of students who are taking AP classes in Portland schools in the aggregate, and then, by school. And I think it's worth noting that, and I will highlight it in the next slide as well, that the increase there is one that we can, look at and feel good about. And it is largely powered by the work that's been done at Deering High School to encourage more and more students to take advanced placement classes. And the next slide shows you that the distribution of students by their racial identification taking AP courses. And you can see that, again, you see the, significant increase in Asian students overall in the district. And, you also see that there's a significant increase of Black and biracial students at Deering that have taken AP classes, in a significant increase in this past year, largely driven by requiring all entering ninth graders to take AP human geography as their social studies class. And so, that's largely driving that increase. And otherwise, we probably would be fairly flat in that particular category. So again, that's something that, as we talk about the high school, the high school choice issue, one of the things that we, have highlighted throughout is the desire to move towards more sort of programmatic alignment across schools. And so this is an example of what that programmatic alignment might look like, when we get deep into that type of work. So next, just quickly on SAT, we wanted to both talk a little bit, I think, to your earlier question, Member Billy, in terms of, are kids still taking the SAT? You see the first slide shows you that there was obviously a very sharp decrease in 2020 in the number of students who took the test. That this is during the lockdown and all that stuff. So very few students. You see a sharp increase the following year, and that's both juniors who normally are the ones taking the test, and also seniors who went and took it that year. And so that, you see the significant number of kids that took it, that basically offsets. And then to my earlier point about, still, even though it's not required anymore, a large number of students are taking it, this past year, 350, which is roughly, 70% of our 11th grade class took the SAT. And, by and large, the seniors are retesting, so taking a second shot at SAT and things along those lines. So, and I will say that even though SAT was no longer required, there is not a financial hardship for students who so we and the state helps us to cover the testing for anybody who doesn't have the financial resources to do it. That does not quite get into some of the other issues that you talked about, which is the amount of preparation that some students have access to versus other students, which has been shown to make a difference in terms of SAT scores. So, and we do do things like through Make It Happen and so on, but it's not the same level of support that somebody might be able to get on their own. And then just a little bit on the actual scores. So here you see our math and reading scores. Just to give you an idea, SAT says that a score of 480 in reading is considered a college-ready level. So our kids, on average, are better than that. And a score of 530 is college ready for our students. Now, that's a little bit different for 11th graders. It's 460 in reading and 510 in math. And most of our test takers are 11th graders. But even with that, you can see that our math scores are not on average at the level that would be considered college ready. So, and then, we look at also the same data for by race. So you see Black students and white students, and there you can see the significant gap in performance. Again, college ready in the 11th grade is 460 for reading and 510 for math. And so you can see that our white students are, on average, right at that college-ready level in math, and significantly higher than that in reading. And that same is not true for our Black students. So, yeah, that's. I think. Did I miss anything in there significant, Gavin? Is that? Yeah. Okay, and then the last piece is our talented and gifted, our Chapter 104. Again, we highlight this because this is something that we set out in the Portland Promise to try to make it less disproportionate than it was. And, not a lot of success here either. Overall, the number of students who have been identified as eligible for Chapter 104 has increased over the years, but as you'll see, it's primarily driven by by just an overall increase and an increase of non-diverse students. So,
Superintendent, I believe there's a comment or question.
Can you clarify how Chapter 104 eligibility is determined? Isn't it NWEA scores that we just have talked about?
Do you want to talk to that?
I would need to get my document out to go through the specifics. Or it's like the COGAT. There's different assessments. It's not based on
primarily COGAT, and then it's teacher recommendations and
right.
Multiple other data points, but that's the primary way in which students get identified.
We did make
sorry, I was just gonna say, when I was like in elementary school, I don't know if it's exactly the same, but what the process I think was then was like, it was like a certain percentile, like 95, if you're in the 95th percentile or something like that for NWEA, then it is like when the conversation starts for being eligible for gifted and talented, and then you take the COGAT test. And we've just had this whole discussion about the NWEA and the way that is not really the most.
It's never been hard and fast, and definitely not 95%, 95th percentile as the benchmark. But performance on a standardized test along with a teacher recommendation is what traditionally triggered having students then be given additional testing in order to be able to do that.
That was a very that was just what I remember from when I was in third grade, and I was in the Chapter 104 program, and that's what it looked like. But I was also in third grade, so my memory might be a little like.
Well, and I do think, I think you're right, but I was just asking, we can pull this out, not in there. we have a little one pager that speaks to this directly because we changed our practice and how we assess. And so that would have been after
Oh, yeah.
when you got assessed. But basically specifically to try to address disproportionality. So I can follow up with the specifics, but it's definitely not so reliant on the NWA and the COGAT alone.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know.
Yeah.
That's just what I.
Yeah.
And where, sort of, if you go to the next slide, Aaron, you can see that, there's some progress, but it's, there's still a significant work to be done. The most, of our Chapter 104 students are never EL. So these are students that were, tend to be, white, tend to be, less economically diverse. And, but we have increased the percentage of exited EL students in the, Chapter 104, and they actually represent a higher percentage in Chapter 104. They're 10% as opposed to, I think they're 8% in the general population. So, it's a positive move there. You also see the percentage by group that is in Chapter 104. And so you can see that, about 6% of our 6% of our white students and our Asian students are currently in Chapter 104, and almost 10% of our biracial students are in that group. Native American is that's a again, that's a very small number of students, so I would be very cautious in interpreting that. But we still see very few, only 1.6% and 2.8% of our Black and Latinx students are in, are qualified for gifted and talented programs.
Superintendent, clarifying question on the y-axis. It says percent of EL students on this graph, and I was just trying to understand why that is.
I think that's just a mistake in the graph.
Yeah, just mistitled or mislabeled.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's definitely not what that is. So.
Okay, so to questions. Yeah, all right, here we go. Member Lentz.
What is the COGAT?
A test.
That's
It's a test of academic aptitude. I remember seeing it once.
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know if, do they use it for things other than for it's just the, I guess it's just the designated test for
it's widely used as the, that and another test called Naglieri are the ones that are the practice for gifted and talented programming.
So in slide 45, there's the screening slide about Chapter 104. Is the COGAT mandated for everyone? No. So there's some mechanism that sends a kid to that to take that.
Correct. Of course. Yeah.
So back to Maggie's point. So this was the change that we made. So you have to use objective and subjective data. So it's both the interviews and the input from educators and family members, as well as the assessment data. And so for white students, their score must be in the 95th percentile or above. And then that's just like what Maggie described.
Of the NWA or the COGAT? On the
NWA. And that is one of the inputs that would trigger doing the screening. And for non-white students, the cutoff is 75% or above. So there's that difference because of some of the bias that's perceived in the assessment that's trying to address some of that. That's the current practice. And then the subjective data is from parents, teachers, and others who know the child. And then the other thing to just mention on that is Chapter 104 and language development teams collaborated on a specific process to ensure English learners are appropriately considered for identification. And that process has been built into our allow plan for the district. and I mean, just in this, since I'm up here, the state recommends overall districts identify 3 to 5% of the population as qualifying, and we're just at about 5% as a district.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, like this just seems like a place that I would really love to take a deeper dive about what's happening and why it's happening and the ways it's playing out. And so I don't know if we could potentially do another board focus just on this program. I would be interested in that.
We'll put it on the list.
Noted. Thank you. Other questions from the board?
This is just a clarifying one. When was the change made with the like NWA percentages? I'm just curious, but
I think it was early on, so it might have been 17 when we.
Yeah, I mean, it's been since we've been here. And I think it was pre-COVID.
Yeah, it was definitely pre-COVID. I think it was very early on where we started to move in that direction. So I think it was probably in 2017.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I just was wondering.
17 or 18. Yeah.
Member Youssef?
Thank you, Chair. Students with an IEP are, it says SY 19 to 20, they were 0. Is that the case until now, or?
Help me. I don't recall that slide. So.
Oh, that's
where is that?
How many students take the SAT each year?
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I didn't write that. I don't.
You're looking for the clarifying question of in the school year 1920, there were 0 students with an IEP to take the SAT. You're looking for more information there, Member Youssef?
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the year that we had very few kids that took the test, period. So I don't know why that was highlighted as, exceptional thing, but yes, that's what the data shows.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay. So perhaps if there is more information to share with the board afterwards, it will come forth. Or
salient there.
No.
Do you know what percentage of students with IEPs take the SAT in a normal year? I mean, that was an abnormal year, but we can find out.
Yeah, we can find out, and it should track. It was mandatory until previous to that year. And I would
venture to say that it dropped dramatically after that,
Yeah, and we looked at this briefly last year, the superintendent and I'd venture to say that 124 is not representative at all of the district in any subgroup of the students who are because those were early in the year testing because it wasn't offered in April, right? So those are students who take it early or taking it again, etc.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Member Youssef. Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to take a 10. Oh, Member Bilo?
Sorry.
No.
A bit late. You said that was it Deering High School that was requiring all 9th graders to take AP classes?
All 9th graders are taking human geography. Is it human geography?
One AP class?
As a requirement in 9th grade. So 9th grade English, whatever math that you would normally take, and everybody is taking AP geography.
Okay. Do you know if that has within, and this you might not even, but do you know if that has improved Black and brown kids continuous
last year was the first year, so it's
okay.
But that is obviously that's the goal, that showing kids that they can do this level of rigorous work will encourage them to do more of it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because that was one of the issues that I saw was that kids wanted access to those classes, but they weren't given the space, or the guidance counselor wasn't pointing them towards that. So I'm very glad to be able to see this.
do you know, with the test, is that do all the students that take the class take that? No. Okay.
And we removed that requirement from board policy not that long ago.
That's good.
Last year.
Okay.
Last year.
Yeah.
If I could just mention Miss Billio, because my daughter was in 9th grade at Deering last year and she took AP Human Geography. And it's just amazing. Like Deering really resourced well that team, and it was an extraordinary class. So I hope that the experience for different kinds of students was excellent as well. But I know for my daughter, like made her high school experience, and very cool to right out of the gates in high school be able to take a class that engages you like that.
Yeah, no, I didn't take any type of like accelerated class until junior year, which is when I took honor history. But that was mostly because nobody ever told me about those type of courses, and like if I wanted to accelerate my learning, that I had those options. But I know that then there was like certain requirements, I think at the time, whereas like you had to perform well, or your guidance counselor had to suggest for you to enter that space.
It's not unlike what you see in the Chapter 104 data. Is like where all those filters, have a way of then, sort of discouraging participation by some students and not by others.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know, like I actually, sorry to further elaborate on this, but I was talking to my roommate who went to Portland High School, and I went to Deering, obviously, but she literally had the same experience where she wanted to participate in honor classes, and she clearly had the capacity to. And when she was able to take honors English, she was like excelling above even like the kids that had been taking honors classes throughout their school year. So I think it just goes to say that like BIPOC kids don't have the capacity to like acknowledge their own capability to go further, because they're not being given the space to like either see that, or if a teacher sees that, to like further or get them to a space where they can further like take classes that are harder, or further challenge themselves to like be able to see that they can do more.
I think it will be, interesting to see the results of the sort of natural experiment that happened because of COVID, with colleges admitting students without SAT scores.
Yeah.
And it diversified the entering classes in many colleges very significantly, and it'll be interesting to see how those students fare at these rigorous institutions that they otherwise might not have been, accepted at. So.
Yeah. And if you can take college classes that you don't have to pay for, I think that's like an insane, like it's a plus for anybody.
Yeah. Okay. That's
all right
on my end.
So I'd like to call a 10-minute recess to move so we'll come back at 9:15, and then we'll work on our old business. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Wait.
All right, we're back here at tonight's school board meeting. I've learned two things about taking breaks. One is not to wait as long to take one, and that I was short in getting everyone back on time. So anyway, we have 3 items of old business to attend to. One, consideration and action to act on is an item of new business, in addition to some first reads. We'll adjourn, and then there will be workshops on 2 policies that we're attending to at our next meeting that should be relatively quick and are optional for members to stay for. I'm aiming for 10, so we'll see how y'all do with that, but that's that's what I'm aiming for. So to begin with, we're looking at a consideration and action to approve transfers for Presumpscot and Reiche BFOF contingency budget to Longfellow's contingency budget as recommended by the District Advisory Building Committee. Do I have a motion? Member Russell Better, and a second from Chair Figdor. Mr. Superintendent, do you want to speak to this motion?
Yes, and I was going to go through the PowerPoint presentation that is in the, it's actually not in there, so it is. Okay, but instead, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to basically hit the high points from the the memo. And then if there are any questions, we can go and use the PowerPoint as the resource for that. So what we're asking you to approve today is transfer from the contingency funds for the Reiche and Presumpscot projects, where they're currently running significantly below what was budgeted for contingency. And so we've mapped out our architects and engineers have mapped out what they believe will be necessary to complete those projects over the remaining time, and believe that we have significant amount of leeway to do what we're asking you to do, which is to approve a transfer from the contingency funds at those two schools to support contingency needs at Longfellow, where we have been going through the contingency budget at a much faster clip than what was expected. And we are now projecting a significant shortfall in order to be able to realize the construction. So the specific ask is for you to approve moving $406,795 from into the Longfellow contingency. And that is being realized by transferring $178,990 from what is in the Reiche contingency and $227,805 from the Presumpscot contingency. And those numbers are not random. They're a function of the ratio of the original contingency amount. So, I can quickly look at the PowerPoint. Anyway, not as quickly as I thought. So the contingency for Longfellow, I'm sorry, not for Longfellow, the contingency for, why am I having such a hard time finding this? Okay, the Reiche contingency was 44% of the combined contingency. So that amount that we're asking for is 44% of the remainder. And Presumpscot was the remaining 56%. And so that's why we're getting more from the Presumpscot contingency. We still project that we have money in excess of what is necessary to both make these transfers and cover the expected contingencies. There's a slide in the presentation, slide 9, that shows that we expect, this is again projections as of now, to be able to move $300,000 from remainders of those contingencies into the FF&E, which is the what buys all the material, desks, equipment. It's, furniture and equipment, basically. So we'll still be able to add some money back into that, that fund after the Presumpscot and Reiche projects are fully realized. So that's what we're asking for from the board today, is to approve us making that transfer. So. I do want to just point out that we brought this in first read at the last meeting, even though it had not gone to the District Advisory Building Committee. It has since been to the DABC, and it was voted unanimously by the DABC that we bring this to you. So,
great. Thanks, Superintendent. So the questions from the board, and I'll just note, like for myself, I kind of want to make this related to what's happening on the ground in the past week, but really this is a zoom out moment to understand what's needed to complete these projects, and the issues that Longfellow and Presumpscot, of recent will be dealt with as the superintendent addressed in his comments at the top of the meeting, and bring forth reports in the future on that. So if we stay focused on the bigger picture at this moment, it will be most helpful to our conversation. So any questions related to this action to move funds? Member Rosa.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to make a brief comment that as a member of the DABC, I appreciate the ongoing commitment to all of the buildings getting done, and that all of the communities have really worked collectively to ensure that happened over time, and hiccups along the way with the project. So I just felt very heartened that, as the superintendent said, it was a unanimous decision on the committee level, and also in sharing the building level advisory committee also, that folks are in support of shifting these funds. So just wanted to make that comment. Thanks.
Thanks. Any other questions on this piece? No. Okay. Is there any public comment on the motion? This is only related to the movement of funds and contingency budgets. I don't see anybody here in the room, and I don't see any hands raised. So I will close public comment. And any board discussion on this motion? Chair Figdor?
I want to just echo what Board Member Russell Better said. The reason that we're able to renovate these 4 schools is because our communities came together and said, we're all in this together. And I also appreciate that ethic is still with us as we strive to finish the projects. So I am strongly in support of moving this money as proposed.
Great, thank you. See no other comments. So we'll move forward to a roll call vote. Please indicate whether you're in favor.
Did we get motion?
Oh, did I? I'm moving too fast. Thank you for catching me. So wait, didn't we do?
That's where I don't know. It was a legitimate question.
Oh, okay. Everyone's shaking their head. No, I skipped that. All right. Going backwards. Is there a motion on this consideration and action? Thank you. Member Bryden, was there a second? Chair Victor? Yeah.
We did.
I think there was just a glitch in the matrix, but we're sure now. We're sure now.
Bilu and Figdor.
Okay.
Was it Bilu and Figdor originally? Is that okay?
No, I think we did want to introduce it, but we didn't do want to approve it.
No, the vote
Oh yeah.
approval will come now, but I missed whether we had done the motion and stuff. So apologies.
All right.
Okay.
I'm hearing it was Aura and Emily for the first and second, which reconciles with my fragmented memory at this point.
Apologies.
No.
Okay.
Thanks for
Ready
keeping
for
us
the
on our
vote?
toes. Yeah, let's go to the vote.
Miss Bilu,
Yes.
Miss Bryden,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Grant,
Yes.
Miss Lentz,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Miss Ellis,
Yes.
and Miss Dio,
Abstain.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes.
So the motion passes unanimously with 1 abstention and 1 vote, along with the majority from our student reps. With that, we're going to move to consideration and action to approve the Portland Adult Education 22 to 23 calendar. Is there a motion? Member Lentz and a second by Bilu. Thank you. We got that?
Got that.
All right. We're back on track. Mr. Superintendent, would you like to speak to this motion?
That's the problem is I'm trying to speak at the same time,
Yeah.
find the notes to speak and do that. Okay, so we're asking you to approve the 2022-23 calendar for Portland Adult Education. It's generally approved at around the same time as the district calendar, but this year with transitions at PAE, we did not bring it to the board and just discovered that recently. So you had a first reading on the calendar at the August 16th meeting. The calendar is, as it normally is, consistent with the district calendar in that all contracted teachers work for the same number of days during the school year. And, obviously they, even though their hours are very different, work the same number of hours that are contracted by their, membership in that bargaining unit. So the adult education calendar adheres to the most parts of the schedule that the district has. but it differs obviously in terms of the hours in which the program is provided because of the nature of the student body there, more flexibility and different registration times in order to enable that to happen. There is a detailed memo with all of the specifics that I'm not going to go into, but that's again, this is something that we normally would have done back in March, April, but we completely flubbed it.
Okay. So we've done our motions. We've heard from you, Superintendent. Now we're on to any questions from the board on the motion. I see none. Any public comment on this motion? Nobody in the room. I don't see any hands on Zoom. So I'll close public comment, move to board discussion. Is there any? Just shaking heads. So we'll move to roll call vote, Superintendent.
Ms. Bidlieu?
Yes.
Ms. Bryden?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Grant?
Yes.
Ms. Lentz?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Diu?
Yes.
Ms. Ellis?
Yes.
And Chair Fichter?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously with our student reps voting with the majority. And now on to consideration and action to approve the request for proposals to contract with a search firm for recruitment and selection of a new superintendent. Is there a motion? Yeah, it's Member Bigelow and Member Lentz for first and second. Now, Mr. Superintendent, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes. So the school district is beginning its national search for a qualified candidate to become its new superintendent of schools as of July 1st, 2023. And in order to ensure an orderly transition, you're seeking to finalize a selection of the new superintendent by May 14th. To help in the national search for the most qualified candidate, the school district is seeking to retain the services of an executive search firm or individual with experience in the national recruitment of superintendents for a district like ours. The RFP specifies that respondents will be responsible for a number of things, developing search criteria that incorporates the district's goals and the leadership characteristics that the board and the community consider requisite for success, develop a candidate identification process that identifies a diverse pool of highly qualified and competent candidates from within Portland Public Schools and from school districts and organizations with similar community contexts and commitment to removing institutional barriers and developing programs that level the playing field for BIPOC students. Conducting a compensation analysis with similar districts adjusted to regional costs that positions the district to successfully recruit the type of superintendent that Portland Public Schools seeks. Analyzing the alignment between the existing job description and any desired qualifications resulting from board and community feedback. And I will note that that is a change from what was originally in the previous version of the RFP. Very few changes to the actual RFP, but that is one that came out of our conversation about this in workshop. Developing an application process for the position, soliciting applications nationally, and cultivating internal candidates. Advising the board regarding identification and assessment of candidates and assisting with logistics for finalist interviews. And then at the end to ensure a guarantee, if you will, satisfactory completion of the search, including the provision of specified retained employment guarantee. So that basically means that if the superintendent that is hired does not remain for a specific period of time, that the search firm will, provide another search charge. So respondents to this RFP will be expected to provide references and a detailed budget, and the board is encouraging Black and Indigenous owned firms and those with BIPOC owners and principals to apply. The responses to the RFP must be received by October of 2022, and the estimated cost for this is in the range of $75,000 for all aspects of the search based on previous searches, and current rates and funding for that will be from the board's contingency line and or other consultant service lines within the district. And so the RFP is actually attached. It is similar to the one that you had previously seen, just with some minor formatting and a handful of issues that came up during the review and workshop.
Okay, all set, Superintendent? Great. So first off, any questions from the board on this motion? I see none. I had one. I was just to clarify the where student reps sit within the designation for the committee, where they to be considered as part of the 5 or the 7.
My understanding is that they're considered a part of the 7.
That's right. So any of our student reps who are interested in being a part of the search committee should apply as part of the community process. And we very much, the resolution that we'll get to on first read next has us having at least one student as part of the committee.
Great. Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Seeing none, I'll go to public comment. None in the room. Seeing any, please raise your hand on Zoom if you'd like to make a comment on this item. I'm going to slow down here a little.
You're doing good.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I see no hands raised, so I'll close public comment. Any discussion from the board? No? Okay, I'll just say that I appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into this RFP, and then I'm trying to move myself from reluctance to excitement for the process ahead, and also perhaps a weird time to mention it, but when we talk about salary, it was flagged for me in my own memory that the superintendent has not taken a salary raise throughout his tenure, to his credit. And so we can expect to see something that might look quite different when we get to the salary exploration with a consultant. So just want to flag that ahead of time. All right, we'll move to a roll call vote.
Yes. Ms. Billiou?
Yes.
Ms. Bride?
Yes.
Mr. Grant?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mr. Grant?
Still yes.
Ms. Lenz?
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Diu?
Yes.
And Ms. Ellis?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously with student reps voting with the majority. And that is the conclusion of our old business. We'll move to new business. First, there's a first read of a resolution to direct the superintendent to balance Deering and Portland High School enrollment. We're not going to do what we just did with motions and questions and discussion and such, but I wanted to provide an opportunity if any members of the board were planning to bring forward an amendment next week, or 2 weeks, excuse me, related to this resolution, if they would like to give voice to those amendments tonight so that there's time for the board to at least hear it before then. It's much appreciated. Okay, let's see Member Grant's hand.
Thank you, Chair. I think I first should note that there have been a couple revisions of the resolution since we last spoke in public about this. I know of 2 at least because I spoke of them with the superintendent. Those include what we'll call a sibling provision, and then also a provision to include some sort of voluntary choice by students if it's determined that some students do need to switch between the high schools, that the district provide an opportunity for kids who may not feel strongly about one or the other to voluntarily make that choice once we know that there has to be some sort of rebalancing. So from what I understand, those are now included.
The second part is not included in that,
okay,
at that level of detail, but I can go back and offer that. It will mean an additional step in the process.
Okay.
Just as to specify too that it's not in the resolution, those are part of the rules, the lottery rules.
Yes, that's right.
And then it may be worth following up to just make sure that we're addressing. I think the way we added it in the lottery rules is that students could indicate that they didn't have a preference.
Right. Yeah, sorry, I used the wrong terminology, but thank you.
So it's not a second shot at expressing no preference. It's just the initial no preference.
Yep. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
But there were additional changes. Maybe I can take this opportunity.
Yeah.
To share that.
Why don't we do that
saw.
before I get to my proposal?
Do you want to run through them?
Sure.
There were there's a red line version that might be helpful to look at. It's maybe the second to the third to the bottom document, and there's a couple new clauses in particular that it might be worth the superintendent reviewing.
Yeah. So in the whereases, there's some adjustments to those just for clarification purposes, and there's the addition of a whereas that says that basically we spend a lot of time in this choice process that creates an atmosphere of competition rather than one of collaboration, something that we've highlighted in the presentations but wasn't in the resolution. And so it now is. And then the most substantive changes are in the first, therefore, and that basically is tighter definition around the role of what the board is directing me to do. And so it says that it directs the superintendent to add guardrails to the high school selection process that maintain the opportunity for students to select among the high schools while balancing enrollment and demographics to ensure equivalent programming at the two comprehensive high schools. And so I think that particular piece is the sort of giving name to wanting to have equivalent programming at the two comprehensive schools. So that's one change. The other one is I added in, and it's in green in that version, is that to maintain that equivalent programming, that we use the specified high school choice lottery rules that are attached. So it incorporates those rules into the resolution, which they existed separately, but now this incorporates them. And then the last one is that, and it sort of addresses some of the comments that I think we heard today about, or at least one comment that we heard today about teachers being the ones communicating to a student that they did or didn't get into a school. And so it basically shifts the responsibility for, pretty much the entire high school selection process to the superintendent's office. Up until the time that the students receive the information about what school that they are accepted into, at which point then we will allow students to go on school tours. And so it removes a lot of those issues that I think Ms. Bryden raised during the workshop around, the sales aspect of this. And if you do a great job versus not a great job, then, that has, it really isn't about what your actual program and what you can get at the school, but it's rather how well we did. And I know that you've gotten comments on this, over the weekend from members of the community and things along those lines. So, so I think that is sort of centralizing this process through the resolution as opposed to, the way that we've been sort of slowly moving in that direction. So those are the more substantive changes.
Okay. Thank you for identifying the changes so that the board and public can be notified that there is an updated draft of a resolution here in our first read. And then we'll get back if there is any members that were planning to bring forth an amendment at our next meeting. If they'd like to give voice to that tonight, you're welcome to. And then we're going to move on in the agenda. Yep. Member Bryden.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't have an amendment in mind right now. And a lot of the revisions that we just discussed certainly are good. I like that. But I am still having a tough time with the resolution in general. And so like if we were voting on it right now, I wouldn't be able to support it. Some of the concerns that I have are, I think we've had a lot of really good discussion about some of the issues that we need to tackle. But I'm not seeing in the resolution any commitment to tackle some of, so for example, the schedule misalignment between the two comprehensive high schools. I watched some of the videos that thank you, thank you for making sure they landed with us. And as I was watching the Portland and Deering presentations, part of my thought process was, this is why a lot of kids were voicing schedule as a reason, because it was one of the very few big things that are different. So I would like to see a stronger, I hear all of the statements around, we're going to get in better alignment. Okay, that's a great statement, but I would like to see some action around like a plan or a deadline or, that sort of thing. I'm also just not feeling really good about the fact that Casco Bay wouldn't have to have any impact on this at all. That we can't bump up the numbers a little bit to sort of help with the, what we need to do district wide. That makes me feel not great. And just overall, I'd really like to see us figure out if we're going to, I don't love the idea of having a lottery, but if we're going to do that, can we get to a goal of 0 people having to get the, sorry, which the other loud thought in my mind is that all 3 of our high schools are very good. Nobody should, necessarily feel as though they're going to have a bad high school outcome because they didn't end up where they wanted to be. And, life is full of disappointment and all of those things. But also, if we're going to say that almost everybody gets what they want and then some people don't, I'd like to see more attention given to trying to drive that number down as low as possible.
Thank you, Member Bryan. I'm just going to move us on to the next person so that we're avoiding the board discussion at this point. But Member Grant.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to preview this. I plan to offer an amendment at the next meeting. I hope I can just describe it briefly. You can withhold judgment until you get to sit and think about it for a little bit. I come to this wrestling with the question of, when do we break glass in case of emergency, right? We're all talking about a policy that none of us want to implement. We don't want to impose this on kids. So what is the actual threshold point where we need to do this? I'm not convinced at this point that anyone can say, here's the number and can defend that really credibly. So I think that the decision should lie with the board. So my amendment is going to be that the district go through the process of the high school choice and then bring the numbers to the board for decision by the board, by a board vote as to whether or not the lottery system that we set up is triggered at that point. I come to that from the perspective of a parent. I am a parent myself and other parents. And I think I would feel much better if my elected officials made that decision as opposed to being told that, the bureaucracy said it was a number and your kid didn't make it into that number. Kind of playing off what Member Bryden said, I think we should be doing everything we can to not have this happen. And at this point, I just think that we can exercise some discretion and judgment when the time comes and we know the actual numbers. So that's my little spiel on it. I know we don't want to engage in discussion, but I thought I owed you all some context. So that will be the amendment that I bring forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Is anybody else? Member Lentz?
Yeah, I think I'm still struggling about when I'm allowed to say what in which section. So tell me if this is not allowed. I think like the thing that I've just been hearing so much from community members and also my own experience is that this feels fast. And I understand it has to be fast to be implemented with the next class. But I think even as a new board member, like trying to get oriented to where all the information is and understanding the problem. Like, I think that the problem hasn't been as communicated as clearly as it could be to the community. And I think we're relying a lot on folks to be able to come to board meetings and read board notes to understand the problem. I think if more people understood the problem, that we would have more people on board or engaged in the process, maybe. I don't use formal titles either. Other Sarah said, I would like to see this as like part of a plan, not just like, because this isn't actually fixing a lot of the issues that have come up, and it just feels like it needs to be a part of a bigger conversation. I also just I heard several comments tonight about like, how is this part of equity? And I think that I would really like to help the community understand how this is so clearly part of equity, and how at all the data that we were looking at tonight, in theory, should get better if we balance out enrollment in these ways, right? So I just wonder if there's an amendment that we could introduce to potentially extend, and also think about other ways to engage the community, not just for this, but as a practice as we move out of COVID and are able to.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'll just acknowledge that I think the intention behind opening up this opportunity to speak was in part to just increase opportunity to hear, board thoughts in advance of the 20th, but staying out of the, we're not voting on it tonight. There's no action taken. And to that point, I just want to make sure it's clear to the community as well. There will be public comment on the evening when this is being voted on. So there was a hearing tonight, and there will be hearing or the opportunity to speak again on the motion at the next board meeting as well. So just want to make that abundantly clear.
Chair, may I say one thing?
Mm-hmm.
Just one thing that each of you, Sarah, and Ben all mentioned is kind of addressing the larger question of moving to common expectations and schedules. And one option might be to, that we could all think about is directing the superintendent or the policy committee to come up with a plan with a specific timeline and metrics, and report back to the board on that, on a specified timeline. So there's no reason we can't do that. So I just want to throw that out there.
Sorry, I just want to say something.
Please.
But I want us to, I guess, just be mindful that our students are resilient, and they're not fragile people, and they have the capacity to be resilient towards change like this, and towards something that could have the capacity to be better for us. And I definitely think that, yes, we should take the time to make sure this is what we want, and this is what we feel is going to really create the change that we want. But I think a lot of times kids are seen as this very fragile state of mind, where I think change should we should be willing to change. I don't think we should be trying to get stuck in the same thing or in the same system that we've had for so long. I think being so resistant to change is being resistant to the ways we're attempting to change, is being resistant to the ways in which we're trying to improve, right? Or we're trying to find programming that either fits or doesn't. And then when it doesn't, that's when we can go back and reflect on how we should have done better. But I think if we stay the same, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to get any information, and we're not going to be able to see ourselves, whether we achieve or whether we fail. We're not going to be able to see that capacity for ourselves, and to see if we do have the capacity to actually implement change that is good for our students, that does that does represent their needs. Or if it's not, then we see that we see that we had the time and we attempted something and it didn't go right, and now we can take the time to address that. But I think change is something, especially at Portland, Maine as a whole, we really just need to be susceptible to changing the ways in which we've always done things. And I'm not saying that might be good or bad, but I think any type of change is helpful for the state.
Great. Okay. Thank you. I think, here we are again, Member Grant.
I just wanted to chime in support of what Chair Figdor has suggested. I thought that could be another item of new business we could put forward at the end of our list here tonight.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move us on from this item. again, no decision was made tonight. Some board thoughts were expressed to increase communication amongst the board and some transparency with the public. I think that's all good. There'll be the opportunity for public comment at the next board meeting when this is up for vote, and the things that have been brought forward tonight can be brought forward as amendments or further action. And if you have questions about that here on the board, talk to the superintendent or Chair Figdor or myself, and we'll make sure you have the right lanes to move forward in. So there's a first read for the second time to approve revised policy JLF, reporting child abuse and neglect, and there will be a brief workshop on this item after the adjournment of this meeting. There's a first read to approve revised policy JICH, drug and alcohol, also a brief workshop following the adjournment of this meeting on that item. Then lastly, there's a consideration and action to approve a resolution directing the appointments committee to solicit and review applications for the superintendent search committee. And here I will need a motion. Is there a motion on this action?
What are we motioning?
Because we're going to move to that. Member Bryden, is there a second? Member Grant? Okay. Mr. Superintendent, do you want to speak to this motion?
Yep. So earlier in the evening, you approved the release of the RFP to contract with a search firm to help recruit and vet candidates for the next superintendent. Because the board is committed to community engagement in the search process, you had previously stated your intent to have a broad search committee composed of 5 board members and 7 community members appointed by the board to manage the selection of a search firm and lead the selection process. As we considered how do we recruit people for that search committee, we noted that board policy BCF states that advisory panels or committees will be established by a resolution and voted on by the board, including the number of members and the membership composition. So that to that end, we're asking you to take action tonight on a resolution that does that. The resolution charges the board's appointments committee with the recruitment and making recommendations of community candidates to serve on the search committee. The resolution specifies that the recommended slate shall include at least 1 student, 1 teacher, 1 other district employee, and 1 parent of a current student enrolled in the district. So that's the minimum 4 different categories for the 7 positions. The timeline calls for the panel to be approved by the board prior to receiving responses to the search firm. And as you heard earlier, that is October 14th. So if approved tonight, I will work with the appointments committee and our communications office to issue a call for applicants, recruit and review applications prior to the October 4th meeting through the appointments committee so that they can be approved at the October 18th board meeting is the target timeline that I've built.
Great. All set, Superintendent? Yeah. So first, any board questions? And Member Bryden? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. If I'm not mistaken, there's no meeting on the 4th, but there is on the 11th.
Of October. Got moved.
It's quite possible.
It's based on like calendar invitations in my email.
Yes, that's what's on the calendar.
And that I suspect that is because of the holidays.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this would happen at the October 11th meeting. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? I'm seeing none. Any public comment? See none in the room. If you're on Zoom, you can raise your hand. Close public comment and move to any board discussion. Seeing none, we can move to, Member or Chair Figdor.
I'll just say that I really look forward to the robust involvement of the public in this process. And that's what we set out in this resolution.
Great, thank you. And by roll call vote, please indicate whether you're in favor of this motion. Mr. Superintendent, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Ms. Bilyeu?
Yes.
Miss Bryden,
Yes.
Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Grant,
Yes.
Miss Lentz,
Yes.
Miss Russell Better,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Miss Diu,
Yes.
Miss Ellis,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes.
And the motion passes unanimously with the student representatives voting with a majority. And that concludes our new business. We attended to personnel items earlier, and so we are at adjournment, a consideration and action to adjourn the business meeting. Is there a motion? For Bryden, is there a second? Mr. Youssef, and all in favor, you can just indicate with a raise of hands. And that's unanimous, and it's 10:02. Go us.